leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are about to take part in the first official hustings with Tory members. The event in Leeds is the first of 12 sessions taking place across the country and will be hosted by LBC's Nick Ferrari. The winner of the contest will be announced at the start of September. These people have told LBC what they believe are the key issues.
We've got to cut the taxes. I understand we've had to put the tax up for the sake of, obviously, COVID, the backlog and everything, but we've just got to go from there.
Well, I think they've got to tackle the cost of living and electricity price issues straight away. But there are issues like Ukraine and facing up to the Russians. There's a housing crisis in this country.
You can watch the hustings live on Global Player. Energy giants are continuing to profit off soaring prices as households are warned their bills could reach £4,000 next year. Shell's earnings hit £9.5 billion for the second quarter of the year, while Centrica took £1.3 billion. Earlier this week, it was suggested the average energy bill could reach £3,850 a year by January. Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi insists the government is looking ahead to further support.
Last night, I met with my senior team in the Treasury to see what more we need to do. We are absolutely focused on this now, and I hope whoever is in number 10 Downing Street on the 5th of September, we will have all the plans ready to see what more we can do. But we will always be on the side of people, try and help wherever we can to mitigate against these energy price shocks.
The Supreme Court says it won't intervene in the case of Archie Battersby. Appeal judges backed a previous decision earlier this week that doctors can lawfully withdraw the 12-year-old's life support. He's been in a coma since suffering a severe brain injury in April, but his parents say he is still showing signs of life. Staff at Britain's biggest container port are going on strike in a row over pay. Members of the Unite union have rejected a 5% pay offer and have warned walking out next month will bring Felixstowe to a standstill. And Birmingham is ready to start the Commonwealth Games with tonight's opening ceremony. Teams from 72 nations will take part in what's been called one of the most inclusive games ever. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 2 points at 73.45. The pound buys $1.21 and €1.19. LBC weather, showers continuing across northern areas tonight, staying dry elsewhere, lows of 10 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation.
Hello there, welcome back. Just gone 7 o'clock here on LBC, where in the next few minutes we will be crossing live to Leeds as the battle for PM hots up. Nick Ferrari hosting the first debate in front of Tory party members between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Their first opportunity to make their pitches directly to the people who matter in choosing our next Prime Minister. And that is, of course, the party base. They are the ones with the vote, but you are the ones with the say. I want to hear what you've made of the candidates so far, what you want Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss to focus on tonight, and whether the things that they've said so far are on the issues that matter to you. We haven't heard a great deal about the NHS. We haven't heard a great deal about things like childcare or skills or schools. What do you want Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, who want to be my Prime Minister and yours, to be focusing on tonight? Because they're not just running to be the party leader, they are running to be our national leader too. 0345 6060 973, the number to call. We will cross live to Leeds, as I say, as soon as that debate gets underway. For now, though, I want to hear from you. Your call's coming up in just a moment. I'm delighted now, though, to be able to bring in Ian Dale, LBC presenter, author and commentator, who hosted Ian Countless, it probably felt like even more to you, Conservative leadership hustings in 2019. Very good evening to you, Ian. What's it like to host these sorts of events? What's it like behind the scenes? What will the candidates be doing now? What will Nick be doing now? Set the scene for us, if you would.
Well, the first hustings, in a way, is always the most interesting one, because it always is. And last time in 2019, you may remember that it was in Birmingham, and it was the day after Boris Johnson and Carrie had a flaming row, which their neighbours had kindly recorded, as you do, and sent to The Guardian. And I remember saying to Brandon Lewis, who was then the party chairman, on the way up to Birmingham, I said, "You do know I'm going to have to ask him about this, don't you?" And to his credit, he said, well, that's your job. You ask what you like. That's what you're there to do. And one of the good things about the process last time was that there was no interference from the Conservative Party. I had complete control over the questions. Now, a lot of questions were sent in and I had an iPad and I could choose them, and others were sent in on cards. And as the process went on, I just took random questions, frankly. And I tell you now, the most interesting part of tonight will be the questions from the audience, I suspect, because there's usually some curveball ones. And I made sure that it wasn't just the normal subjects that came up. In fact, there weren't really many questions about Brexit, believe it or not. There were lots of questions about what some people would think was sort of non-conservative subjects. I mean, I remember lots on mental health, for example. So I tried to throw a few curveballs in, because that's when you get to know the strengths and weaknesses of the candidates. Can they cope with the unexpected? And also, they will give a 10-minute speech each, which, I mean, is probably going to be more or less the same each time. I almost learnt them off by heart by the end of it. But at the moment, I mean, they will all be quite nervous. I mean, there's 1,400 people.
I was going to ask you that. These are experienced politicians. They're statesmen. They're people who've been public speaking for many years. Do they still get nervous at these sorts of events, given how high the stakes are?
I think if you don't get nervous at this type of event, you're probably not on top of your game. You need a few nerves to really make you perform. And it's the same, frankly, whether you're the host of the hustings or actually taking part. I mean, Nick will be a bit nervous tonight. I mean, who wouldn't be standing up in front of 1,400 people, sort of live television coverage and all the rest of it? The focus is on the three of them this evening, not just the candidates. And it'll be, I mean, what I'm interested to see is, because they're using, I did 10 of the hustings. I think it was 16 different hustings last time. So I did 10 of them, and Hannah Vaughan-Jones did the other 6. Now, this time, they're having a different host for each of the 12 hustings. Now, I think that's a good thing, because it'll shake it up a bit, because each event will be a bit different. Whereas if you have the same host, inevitably, it is a little bit samey. You've got a different audience, but you've got different personalities this time. So I think that's probably going to be a good thing.
And from your experience, and you say nerves are good, what else helps? What else works in these types of events? If you were advising either of the candidates tonight, what would you be saying to them? What should they do?
What they should do is actually be themselves, show themselves as human beings, first of all. And I think both of the candidates have a little bit of a problem with that. Liz Truss can seem quite robotic. She has come out of herself a little bit in the last 2 debates, though. She's actually got a very, very good sense of humour. She needs to show a lot more of that, I think. Rishi Sunak is a very polished performer. He is a nice person, but he sometimes comes across as a bit smug, a bit smarmy, a little bit Tony Blair in his sort of hand movements and his characteristics. So I think they both just want to relax, which is easier said than done in this kind of environment. I hope neither of them has a script to follow in their speech. I hope they don't have any notes on stage at all. If you want to lead the country, you ought to be able to give a speech like this without notes. And I'll be very interested to see if either of them do have notes with them. And then, of course, Nick will be grilling them for, I think, 15 minutes each. Now, that will tell us something, I imagine, because we all know Nick's style of interviewing. He doesn't. He can be quite robust at times, but he will also be aware that it's not his normal sort of breakfast show interview. I mean, what his job tonight is to enable the audience to know more about these candidates than they did when they walked into the building. It's as simple as that. It doesn't have to be a sort of really aggressive questioning, but it does need to be, if they don't answer a question, you do need to keep going back. I remember when I asked Boris in that first debate about the Guardian story. I mean, he just went around the house and started talking about red buses. I went back. The audience started booing because either they didn't like the fact that I was asking the questions or the fact that he wasn't answering them. And I remember thinking, I want to laugh at this, but I can't. So there will be some moments tonight, but I would almost guarantee you those moments will come from the audience questions.
Can I ask you about exactly that, Ian, the audience? These are Tory party members. They are the people who in the coming weeks will elect our next Prime Minister. There's quite a lot of misconceptions, quite a lot of stereotypes about who Tory party members are, that they are all in their 70s and 80s and they spend their time reading the Daily Telegraph in their farmhouses. Who are Tory party members really? You know the base best. Tell us about the people that are electing the next Prime Minister.
Well, I mean, they are slightly older than the average in the population, it has to be said, but the average age, I think, has been coming down. They come from vastly different backgrounds than they used to. I remember in the London hustings last time, of which 4,000 people were in the audience, and I was sitting on the stage while Jeremy Hunt was answering a question, and I just looked from one side of the audience to the other. And I thought, boy, has the Conservative Party changed. I reckon 35 to 40% of the audience were non-white. Well, that would not have happened even 5 years ago, let alone 25 years ago. You saw that also with the diverse makeup of the original candidate lineup here. And they're not afraid to ask difficult questions. It won't be, oh, please tell us your favourite colour, Mr. Sunak. It will be really to the point questions. They're not afraid to ask difficult questions. And that's why I think that is going to be probably the highlight of this evening. And they are from there are lots of young Conservatives, by which I mean sort of 16 to 25. Then there are lots of older Conservatives. What they tend to, and this has always been the case, they've lacked the middle bit, the sort of the 30 to 50s. Because if you're between 30 and 50, you're probably building a family, building a career, and you don't have time for active politics. So it's really sort of the edges of the age ranges that they tend to attract. But these events may be rather different, though, because if you're a member of a political party and you live within travelling distance of one of the hustings, you probably want to go, because they are real events. And I tried to make them relatively relaxed. I tried to sort of introduce a little bit of X Factor style presentation in it, because they've got 2 hours. They've got 2 hours sitting through this.
Did you make them sing?
I didn't make them sing, no. They want to be entertained. And the candidate that can come out of this thinking, I've actually given them a bit of a performance tonight, that's probably the candidate that will come out on top on the night. But of course, as we keep saying, there's 5 weeks for this.
Ian, thank you. And you're going to stay with us. Leave it there for now. We will come back to you. Fascinating as ever. Ian Dale there, of course, doesn't need an introduction, but LBC presenter, author and commentator who hosted a lot of these events in 2019. We are just minutes away from that kicking off, so stay with us. Don't go away. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak making their pitches to party members for the first time. Back to your calls for now, though. Morris is calling from Bayswater. Morris, what do you think?
Yeah, listen, I've listened to both of the debates going on. At no time have I heard anyone actually talk about how they're going to challenge to get police back on the streets and everyday crimes, which everyone seems to be suffering, but nothing gets done about. There's an issue for me. What about the civil service? Are they going to challenge the civil service to get their fingers out and get back to work? Because obviously our lorry drivers and all our skilled workers, driving tests and everything. Right? And what about the
Is that the biggest issue facing the country, Morris? Is that really one of the big issues facing our country? Whether civil servants are in the office?
No, what I'm trying to say is, all we're hearing is about they're going to try and keep taxes down, Brexit, the national debts and this, right? But most of us face on a day-to-day basis all these issues, right? Everything else, right? And not one of them has actually said what they're going to do. I mean, the roads in central London, we're gridlocked. Is anyone going to challenge the mayor to say, what are you actually doing? What about Grant Shapps? Is he still going to be in charge of transport? I mean, he was obviously not doing a great job.
Do you feel, Morris, it sounds to me like what you're saying effectively is that the Tory party, the two candidates are talking to the party members, not talking to people like you, not talking to the public. Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that they're just basically they're just telling us exactly what they're going to do, and probably what they're going to end up failing at. But really, truly, the big problems everyone faces on a day-to-day basis is money, it's our hospitals. I mean, I heard Liz Truss say the other day that this extra money from our taxes to help us get through the COVID at the NHS. But why doesn't someone actually have a look at how much the top executives of the NHS actually get and see if it's actually worth their while to be in that situation?
Morris, thank you. Good to speak to you. Morris in Bayswater there. Lots of text coming in on this. Al says, the issue that I want Sunak and Truss to address tonight is the war in Ukraine. They must not rule out any options in supporting Ukraine to win completely. This is the most important issue of all because it's one of ethics, statesmanship and our self-interest. It affects everything, said, that is, I've lost the name of that text, Nick in Cardiff. It has to be the cost of living and the NHS. They are fundamental in living when it comes to living in the UK. The NHS is collapsing, barely a peep from either candidate. The great winners from this, is Nick in Cardiff says, is going to be the Labour Party. I wonder if you agree with that. I wonder if you think that the two candidates who have selected are a gift for Keir Starmer, or whether you think Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss perhaps would both be better than the Labour alternative. 0345 60 60 973, the number to call. We will bring you, of course, that event, that hustings, live right here on LBC in the next few minutes. If you're joining us on LBC News, you're very welcome to. Stay tuned for that hustings coming up. The time now, 7:15.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC. Tweet at LBC.
7:17 is the time. Well, Valerie's not a fan of Liz Truss. The Conservatives will lose a voter if they choose Liz. Frankly, I find that woman to be truly unpleasant. If she really thinks she can emulate Margaret Thatcher, she is utterly deluded, says Valerie. Eddie says, Ben, the candidates will say what the Tory faithful want to hear. Once they're in power, they will say that circumstances have changed and we can't deliver what we promised. 0345 6060 973, the number to call to have your say on what you think of the race so far and what you want Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak to talk about when they make their opening pitch at the first hustings to Tory party members in the next few minutes. We will go live as soon as it kicks off up in Leeds, so don't go away. For now, though, let's get back to your calls on this. Chris is in Richmond. Chris, evening.
Good evening, Ben. Well, I mean, I look at what they've done as Foreign Secretary and as Chancellor. And actually, it's not great. I mean, Rishi Sunak, if he was the CFO of a large FTSE 100 company and he wasted £37 billion on fraud, I think the board would have had him out a long time ago, don't you?
What do you think he's done so wrong, Chris?
Well, I mean, there's absolutely no control when it came to the furlough situation. Appalling waste in terms of procurement fraud.
Doesn't he deserve some credit for drawing up the furlough scheme at short notice, keeping thousands and thousands of people, possibly millions of people in their work, in jobs?
Well, Yes. But I mean, most other countries did the same. Yes, it was a good scheme, but it was incredibly wasteful. Incredibly wasteful.
It was.
Incredibly wasteful. And as for Liz Truss, I mean, what she's doing in the Northern Ireland Protocol is breaking international law. And this is the Conservative Party, which is always banging on about, the party of law and order. My other point is, locally, I live in a fairly wealthy area where people are doing okay. But my daughter goes to state secondary school, one of the best in the country, but we have to fund new toilet blocks costing, £10,000, £20,000 by doing cupcake sales and quiz evenings. When my mother was dying last year, she spent an hour and a half waiting for an ambulance for having had a massive stroke. Okay, maybe it wouldn't have made a difference, and I don't want to think about it, but there is no interest at all in, well, thank you, and I appreciate it, but, millions of other people have had probably, lots of other things similar, but where is the focus on public services obsession in the Conservative Party about tax cutting? A lot of those people probably don't have children with special needs. People who parents are looking, haven't a carer for weeks or can't get a carer, haven't had a holiday in years. There's such a lack of reality of Conservative Party members in Liz Truss, how ordinary people live.
Is there anything that they could say, Chris? You're clearly not a fan of what they've said and done so far. Is there anything that could change your mind on that? If either candidate said anything tonight, would you say, actually, perhaps you are the one for me after all? Or is it too late?
I'm a lifelong Lib Dem voter. The one thing I would say is they also need to talk about immigration, not as a negative, Rwanda. Talk about the fact that we need people to come to this country now. All right? I'm in a pub at the moment, they're short-staffed. All right? There are hospitals that are short-staffed. There are airport staff that are desperately needed. Not one of these candidates has talked about the lack of labour in this country, and the only way to do that is to join the single market, but they won't do it, and neither will Labour.
Chris, good to speak to you. Thank you. Chris in Richmond. Let's go down to Plymouth. Terry's calling from Plymouth. Evening, Terry.
Yeah, good evening. So the NHS is in crisis. Primary care has collapsed, and these two candidates don't need to wait until September to do something about it. You guys and the rest of the media are giving them an amazing platform. Why are they not calling for the Cabinet and the government to act now? Because we know if the military was tasked, for example, to go and put triage centres outside emergency rooms to allow ambulances to be unloaded, that could be done really swiftly. We learnt that at the beginning of the COVID crisis with all these Nightingale hospitals, and a paramedic sat in an ambulance looking after one patient is not good division of labour. Whereas if you were able to offload those patients, perhaps a paramedic could watch 2, 4 or even 6 patients while they were waiting to get into the emergency room. Why are they waiting? Why are they not using this amazing platform they've got as candidates in this leadership race and all the news coverage and column inches they've got to actually call for action now?
What do you make of what they have said so far? Rishi Sunak's plan to tackle the NHS backlog, Terry, was to set up a task force to look into it. Liz Truss, as far as I'm aware, hasn't published any specific proposals to do that, to tackle the backlog at all.
So we're in the summer, and they're beyond winter crisis levels in these hospitals. That isn't just a backlog that was caused by the pandemic. Waiting lists and difficulty with getting GP appointments, started happening long ago. So we don't need a task force. What we actually need is some action. Now, whether that is, in the short term, creating triage centres, actively recruiting more doctors and nurses from outside the country, trying to relieve the pressures on the ones that are actually working in the NHS so hard that they're retiring early, trying to encourage people to come back. Think about what this country did. Think about how the general public pivoted to man vaccination centres. Do not tell me that if the call went out, that we wouldn't see those same people volunteering again.
Okay. Terry, thank you. Terry in Plymouth, good to speak to you. No name on this text. To win, and I mean really win, both candidates need to be inspirational. Rishi needs to be less of a chancellor and broaden his perspective. Liz needs to connect and not just talk about the past. The decision should be not just who will win this leadership bid, but who will win the next election and inspire to create a better Britain like Blair did. That is one text. Let's go to Joe in Colchester. Joe, evening to you.
Evening, Ben. How you doing? All right?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Good.
I just wanted to say, just looking at, I've been following this leadership battle quite fairly closely. I'm seriously worried if we've got a choice of these two candidates to be the next Prime Minister about the immediate future of this country. I'm a Labour supporter myself. I've always been a Labour voter. So ultimately, I want a general election. But the reality is that we're 18 months away from that. Potentially, or even longer, and I'm in two minds really. I've been trying to make up my mind up who I want to win, who I think is going to be best in the short term as Prime Minister, or who is going to be the easiest candidate for Keir Starmer to beat in the next election.
What conclusion have you come to on those two questions, Joe?
Well, Liz Truss, I think, would be beaten hands down. I think she will destroy this country, and the people will turn to Keir Starmer. He won't have to do much more. I know we've talked a lot about how he's not really making clear what his policies are, and he's a little bit blurred with the direction of travel of the Labour Party. But I think that the country will just vote for anyone but her. To be honest with you. So as far as Labour's chance in the next election, then Liz Truss. But I actually don't want that. You know, I'm a citizen of this country, and we've got 18 months, and under Liz Truss, I think we're in real danger. I think her comments on workers are very worrying. Trade union strikes will be happening left, right, and centre. People aren't going to take the sort of language that she's used on that front. Along with, I don't believe she has a clue economically. I think Rishi Sunak, for all of his faults, does sound like a far more measured
Got to leave it there,
person.
Joe. Got to leave it there. Let's cross live to Leeds now for the first Tory party hustings. The battle for PM. We're about to go live with LBC and Nick Ferrari. Rishi Sunak is about to take to the stage.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Fantastic to be here in Yorkshire. Now, this campaign has been absolutely brilliant. I've been having the time of my life over the last week, being out and about across the country, talking to all of you, talking to all our members. The weather's been fantastic, so we've been in so many people's gardens. The sun has been shining, so much so that someone even said to me the other day, "Wow, you've got a great tan." Look, I'm standing here tonight in front of you all for one simple reason, and that's because this country did something absolutely incredible for my family. It welcomed them here as immigrants 60 years ago and allowed them to build a better life. My dad was an NHS GP. My mum ran the local chemist in Southampton, where I grew up. And they brought me up with a set of values that are absolutely core to who I am today. Now, the first of those values is that family means everything to me. The bonds of love, sacrifice, commitment that family brings are far greater than anything that any government could ever replicate, and we should never forget that. My family also believed in hard work as the way to get ahead. I worked in my mum's shop. I delivered prescriptions out to elderly patients who couldn't come in and pick them up. I worked as a waiter in the local Indian restaurant, all because that was how we moved forward as a family. And for my parents, the best way to provide a better future for their children was through education. And that is why they saved and they sacrificed to provide a brilliant education for their 3 children. And it's why today I believe that the most powerful way we as Conservatives can transform people's lives is through education. So those are my values: patriotism, service, family, hard work, aspiration. I think they're probably all of your values too. And that's because they're Conservative values. My story is a Conservative story. And that's why I want to be Prime Minister. I want to put those Conservative values into action for our country. This country allowed my family to provide me with a better future and fantastic opportunities. And that's what I want to do for everyone, your children and grandchildren. Give them the same opportunities and better future that I enjoyed. And if you support me, I know that we can build a better Britain. A Britain where the birthright of every child is a world-class education. A Britain which is built on hard work, aspiration and hope. A Britain where we lead the world in setting the standards for integrity, decency and leadership. And a Britain where we have enormous pride in our history and enormous confidence in our future. Now, before we get to building that, we have to deal with some immediate challenges facing us today. 3 in particular. We have to restore trust. We have to rebuild the economy. And we have to reunite our country. In order to restore trust, the first thing we have to do is to be honest, because that's how you do it. Now, in this leadership election, you've seen from me, I haven't taken the easy road. There are plenty of things I could have said that would have made my life easy, but I wanted to be honest about the challenges that our country faces and what is going to be required to fix them. Even though it hasn't made my life easy, it is the honest thing to do, and that's what leadership is about. Now, the other way to restore trust is to deliver on the things that we say we do that are important to people. And that's why I set out a plan to tackle the NHS backlogs, because we're reaching the point where millions of people are anxiously waiting for the treatment that they desperately need and deserve. We can't let that happen, and I will grip it and fix it. That's why I set out a plan to tackle illegal migration, because far too long we have watched on our TV screens people coming here illegally. And yes, this is a compassionate and welcoming country that welcomed my family, but we must also have control of our borders. And as Prime Minister, I will finally grip that problem and solve it and restore trust back in the system. Now, you all know we have to rebuild our economy. And you all know that the #1 challenge we face right now is inflation. People's bills rising. We need to grip inflation because it is the enemy that makes everyone poorer. It reduces their living standards. It erodes their hard-earned savings. It pushes up mortgage rates. And I will grip inflation and get it back down. We'll also help people with the cost of living, energy bills this autumn, which is why we will cut VAT on fuel. But what I won't do is embark on a spree borrowing tens and tens of billions of pounds of unfunded promises and put them on the country's credit card and pass them on to our children and our grandchildren to pick up the tab. That's not right. That's not responsible. And it's certainly not conservative. But of course, once we grip inflation and ensure that mortgage rates don't rise and cripple people, I'm going to cut taxes, because I'm a conservative. Of course I'm going to deliver tax cuts. I want people to keep more of what they earn, because hard work is something that I value above everything else. I want to make sure that we cut taxes for business so that they can invest and innovate and grow. And we're also going to grow the economy by taking advantages of Brexit, which I was proud to support. And as Chancellor, I started to deliver on some of the radical things that we can do differently. New free ports across the country, reforming all our regulations in data, in life sciences, in financial services, to ensure that the United Kingdom is the best place in the world to start a business, to grow a business, to innovate. Because in the 21st century economy, that's how you drive growth and create better jobs. And my experience means that I'm the best person to lead our economy into that future. But lastly, we have to reunite our country. Now, in just a couple of years' time, we have to do something, all of us in this room, that have never been done before in British political history. And that is to win a historic 5th election term. That is going to be a challenge. But I know we can do it together. But in order to do it, we're going to have to appeal to swing voters in every part of our country, north and south, Remain and leave, urban and rural, Scotland and Wales. And I believe with all my heart that I am the person, I am the candidate that gives our party the best opportunity to secure that victory and ensure that the Labour Party and Keir Starmer never walk through the doors of number 10 Downing Street. So those are what we're going to do. Restore trust, rebuild the economy, reunite our country. And in conclusion, let me say this. Now, I know the polls say that I'm behind in this race. I know that there are people who say there should be a coronation, not a contest. But you know what? I heard that once before, 7 years ago, when I arrived in Richmond, North Yorkshire. And ultimately, the members there gave me the greatest honour of my life when they selected me to be their candidate, to be their Member of Parliament. Many of them are here tonight, and I owe them an enormous debt of gratitude for placing their faith in me. And they have supported me unfailingly every day since. And today, I'm asking for all of your support. And I promise you, I am going to fight for every single vote. I am going to fight for the conservative values that are core to who I am and what I stand for. And I am going to fight hard for the argument that we should not mortgage our children and our grandchildren's future to make our lives easier today. And if you select me as your leader, as your next Prime Minister, I know we can build that better Britain that I talked about. But I also know that just like I did in Richmond, I will work my utmost to make each and every one of you enormously proud. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you.
Rishi Sunak there making his opening pitch to the Tory party faithful. Started off, as you heard, talking about his family, how he grew up in a small business, how that had shaped his conservative values. He said that this country had given him the opportunities that he's running to be Prime Minister because he wants to give to everybody else. He didn't go into a great deal of detail on policy, mentioned the NHS, mentioned his plan to tackle illegal migration, but also stuck the boot in, not directly, but not very subtly, I would suggest, to his rival Liz Truss on her plans. He said that putting billions on the country's credit card was not right, not responsible, and certainly not conservative. And even in his closing argument there, saying that he would not mortgage our children's and grandchildren's future to make our lives easier today. He is talking about Liz Truss's plans to use debt effectively to cut taxes. Now, he's coming out against it. Also, interestingly, Rishi Sunak focusing on something that he's talked quite a lot about in this contest. That is the fact that he thinks only he can win the next general election. What he's trying to do there, of course, is focus the minds of the Tory party faithful not on what they necessarily want to hear on policy, not on tax cuts or illegal migration or anything else, but on who the next Conservative Prime Minister after the next general election will be. Only he can win that historic fifth term, according to Rishi Sunak. Wonder what you made of all what you just heard. 0345 6060 973, the number to call. Let's bring in Ian Dale back in, LBC presenter, author and commentator. Ian, your verdict?
Well, it was David Cameron 2005, wasn't it? If you were just listening to that, you would not have known that he wasn't standing behind the podium. He had no notes. He wandered around the stage a bit. And it was, in fluency terms, I thought it was a really impressive performance. Now, the interesting thing is going to see whether Liz Truss does exactly the same thing. I've got no idea whether she will or not. But of course, if she doesn't, if she has a speech which she keeps looking down at her notes, that there will be a big contrast there. But did it work? What you have to remember on these occasions is that his main audience was Conservative Party members, people in that hall, 1,400 of them, but also lots of people will be watching online, lots of people listening to us, lots of people watching on television. So there's two audiences in a way. And I thought he addressed the Conservative audience rather well. There were a number of touchstone issues which he ticked off. You would expect him to do that. You're right, there wasn't a huge amount of detail on new policies, on what exactly would be different under a Sunak premiership from a Johnson premiership. But overall, I think he and his team will be quite happy with how that went. The interesting thing, though, is as I was watching him going off stage, there were quite a lot of people who weren't clapping. And that does happen in these occasions. I mean, normally, Conservative audiences, you think, well, they're going to be quite polite. But if you're already in Camp Truss, you may not want to clap her opponent. And maybe I was watching a bit where there were people who weren't necessarily affiliated to the Conservative Party. I don't know. But it was quite telling that in the walk-off, there were quite a few people who weren't applauding him.
What did you make of the joke at the start, Ian? Cyan St Helens has texted, Ben, was it just me or was Rishi's skin colour joke a bit uncomfortable? It was certainly a bit of a gamble.
I couldn't work out whether it got a big laugh or not. The feed sort of went slightly at that point. I think people are always slightly uncomfortable when anybody tells a joke where there's some sort of racial element involved. And sometimes when it is a person of colour telling the joke, it makes it even more awkward in some ways. I'm not sure that's the moment that will be written up in the headlines tomorrow. But all I would say is that's quite an act for Liz Truss to follow. And sometimes you don't want to go on first in these circumstances. I remember back in 2019, Boris Johnson drew the long straw and he went on first and gave a sort of barnstorming performance, and then Jeremy Hunt had to follow him. And I mean, they did it slightly different in 2019, where it was the speech, the Inquisition, and then the questions all together. So by the time Boris Johnson had finished his, 3/4 of an hour or whatever it was on stage, and then Jeremy Hunt came on, a lot of the audience had left because the star attraction had already been on. So I suspect that's why they're doing it differently this time, so it maintains the interest.
Do you think it's also because of the concern about blue-on-blue attacks? The format tonight is two speeches, then a grilling by Nick and the audience. They won't go head-to-head. Is that a sensible move from the Conservative Party, Ian, do you think?
Well, I suggested last time that they should also have a 20-minute element where neither the audience or I was involved. It should be just them sitting on two stools talking to each other. And I was hoping they might do that this time, but given the blue-on-blue attacks in the other debates, I didn't really think there was any chance, and clearly they're not going to do that. You learn much more about two candidates when they interact with each other. We've seen that a couple of times now where they
Ian,
have
OK, let's go back to Ian. Sorry to interrupt. You've got to go back to Leeds now for the first Tory party hustings. Liz Truss is on stage.
I grew up in this great city. I went to school at Allerton Grange and Roundhay. I hope there are no teachers of mine in the audience, and if there are, I'm really, really sorry. I bought my first Whitney Houston album at HMV in Briggate, and my mum and dad still live in this fine city. And what I think I got from Yorkshire is grit, determination, and straight talking. And that, my friends, is what I think we need now in Downing Street. Because the fact is that we face a huge global economic crisis. We have the worst war that's taken place on European shores happening in Ukraine. Now is not the time for business as usual. Now is not the time for the status quo. We need to be bold and we need to do things differently. And what I would do as your Prime Minister is I would launch a plan for economic growth. First of all, reversing the increases in national insurance that we promised not to do in our manifesto. I'd have a moratorium on the Green Levy to save people money on their fuel bills. And I'd also keep corporation tax low so we can attract investment into our towns and cities across Yorkshire and across the whole of our great country, because I believe that we need to be on the side of people who work hard and do the right thing. People who save their money, people who start their own businesses, the self-employed, people who go into work every day. That's whose side I'm on. I'd set up new low-tax investment zones that enable those businesses to start up in areas that have been left behind. I'd abolish the top-down Soviet housing targets that we have across our country. Now, before I became an MP, I was a councillor. I sat on a planning committee, and those are hours of my life that I will never get back. Because we all know how appalling the planning system is. And why should it be the same in London as Cornwall, as Yorkshire? I want to give power back to local people. And why should the transport here be so bad? Now, I remember as a teenager getting the bus into Leeds city centre because there was no other alternative. I'm afraid, my friends, it's not much better now. Leeds is still the largest city in Europe without its own metro network, and I would work to fix that. And I will get Northern Powerhouse Rail built. And I don't know if we've got any farmers in the audience today, but I will also help the brilliant farmers here in Yorkshire who produce great beef and lamb, fantastic Yorkshire rhubarb. I would help them by removing red tape and help them sell their fantastic food across the world. We need to unleash the potential of our great country, and we need to be bold to do that. And I'm the person that can take those steps. But we also need to continue to stand up to Vladimir Putin and the appalling war that he has waged in Ukraine. We were the first European country to send weapons to Ukraine. We put on the toughest sanctions of any country in the world on Russia. And I would not let up until Ukraine prevails and Putin fails. But we have to recognise that we need to spend more on defence. Because after the Cold War, we let our guard slip. We allowed the aggressors to expand. And that is why I would put defence spending up to 3% of GDP by the end of the decade. Because there is nothing more important than freedom and democracy, and we simply can't allow this situation to continue. But as well as freedom and democracy abroad, we also need it at home. And I know we've got an audience full of straight-talking Yorkshire people who know that a woman is a woman. And people who believe in free speech. I love our country, warts and all, and I'm proud to represent us around the world. And I want to do all we can to encourage our fellow citizens to love their country too and unleash its full potential. And finally, my friends, we need to be proud of who we are. We need to be proud to be Conservatives. I'm going to campaign as a Conservative and I will govern as a Conservative. The people who voted for us in 2019 in seats like Keighley, in seats like Dewsbury, they didn't vote for us because they wanted Labour policies. They were fed up of the Labour Party. They were fed up of the failing Labour councils. They voted for us because they wanted opportunity, because they aspired to better things, because they wanted enterprise in their area. And that is what I, as your Prime Minister, am determined to deliver. Now, since I lived in Yorkshire, I have relocated to Norfolk. And I have, I'm afraid to say, and I'm afraid to say this at Elland Road, I've become a supporter of Norwich City FC. They're a fine family club. You know, what can I say? Delia's a great woman, great cookbooks, I think you can all agree. But I do want us to channel the spirit of Don Revie. Because we need to win. We need to win. And my friends, we can win against Keir Starmer, who is a patronising plastic patriot. He is beatable. but he is only beatable if we deliver. And I can assure you, if you select me, if you elect me, I will work my socks off in number 10 to deliver all of the promises we made in 2019 and to deliver a victory for the Conservatives in 2024. Thank you. Thank you.
Liz Truss wrapping up her speech there in Leeds. She also spoke, not from the podium, with no notes, similar to Rishi Sunak. She said she was the candidate to offer grit, straight talking and determination. Interestingly, wasn't it, how she focused specifically on the local audience too, talking about the need for a Leeds Metro, talking about what she would do for farmers in Yorkshire who produced what she said was fantastic Yorkshire rhubarb. She even got in a reference to famous Leeds United player and manager Don Revie. She was speaking very much to the people in that room on a local level, but of course there was a national message too. There was a message about tax cuts. There was a message about defence. She said we need to spend more on defence, 3% of GDP, her pledge, by the end of the decade. Worth remembering that is already a government policy. We must not let up on Ukraine, she said, until Vladimir Putin fails. And then going through some of the other issues, hitting the notes that she thinks Tory members want to hear. A woman is a woman. We must defend free speech. And an attack not on Rishi Sunak, but on Keir Starmer, a patronising plastic patriot, according to Liz Truss. It's got to be said, I think she got a better reaction from the audience than Rishi Sunak did. Laughter at the jokes. A couple of times they applauded during her speech, particularly on the local issues. Interesting that she decided to do that. Rishi Sunak didn't. Ian Dale, LBC presenter, author and commentator. Who gave the better speech in your view?
Liz Truss, without a shadow of a doubt. She put in a performance there that I have to admit I didn't think she was capable of. She again spoke with no notes. And if you remember, at the end of the ITV debate, and I think the Channel 4 debate, when they had to give closing statements, she kept having to look down at her notes, which I thought was a really bad thing to do. In this, she was articulate. She said some interesting things. She was quite amusing. I mean, she, on a personal level, when you meet her, she is quite amusing, but she's always found it difficult to translate that on a public platform. I've been completely surprised by her on this, and I think she outdid Rishi Sunak, who I also thought put in a good performance, but she outdid him.
She seems to have relaxed as the longer this contest has gone on. She's more at ease somehow than she did a few weeks ago.
I think that's absolutely right, and you saw snapshots of that actually in the ITV debate and the short-lived one that had to be curtailed the other night. I mean, sometimes cometh the hour, cometh the man, cometh the woman, and people find sort of inner reserves which they haven't maybe put on display before. Maybe that's what's happening here. But I think if I was an undecided Conservative Party member, comparing those two speeches, I think she would have persuaded quite a lot of people. However, let's see how they do under the inquisition that Mr. Ferrari is about to give them, and then the inquisition from the audience, because that may be very, very different.
Ian, thank you. Stay with us. Tweet here from someone called Robin Hood on Twitter. Liz Truss is hands down winning this contest. Audience clapping after every word she says. Chris in Newcastle says, terrible start from Sunak, where he talked about having the time of his life. He said, I'm not having the time of my life. I'm wondering what I can cut back, sell or reduce to make it through the month, never mind the winter. Plus, I and my wife work hard, 50 to 80 hours a week sometimes, but it doesn't pay, does it? What did you make of what you just heard? What did you think of Rishi Sunak? What did you think of Liz Truss? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. Come to your calls in just a moment. First, though, let's go back up to Leeds. Charlotte Lynch is LBC's reporter at that debate at Ellen Road in Leeds. Charlotte, what was the mood like in the room during those two speeches? It sounded from the video, which, by the way, if you're not listening on Global Player, you can see the live stream on Global Player. But it sounded from the video that we've got here that Liz Truss went down better. Was that your sense too?
I have to say the tempo in the room did pick up when Liz Truss took to the stage. In fact, the introduction from James Cleverly as well, it livened the room up. Now, Liz Truss some may say started on a bad note, especially here in Leeds. Of course, we've heard in the last few days she had less than complimentary things to say about her old school in Leeds, about Roundhay. She began with an apology for that and said she hopes that none of her former teachers are in the room, but she pulled it back with, as you were discussing, humour, of course, as well. Lots of references to her time growing up in Yorkshire. She has since moved to Norwich. She admitted she's now a Norwich supporter. Rishi Sunak, though, his constituency is in Richmond in Yorkshire, but Liz Truss, her speech had a lot more references to her Yorkshire heritage. It went down extremely well in the room. Now, Rishi Sunak did hold the room well too. He received a big round of applause and a laugh for a joke he made at the beginning. Liz Truss, though, throughout the speech, it did seem that she went down better in the room. And a lot of the Tory members I've spoken to here tonight, they're coming in undecided. They don't know which way to go. A lot of them were very complimentary about Boris Johnson. They liked Boris Johnson. They were saying they want someone who is similar to him. And I think with her reference to Sir Keir Starmer as well, Liz Truss was trying to invoke some of Boris Johnson's spirit with his nicknames, with his poking fun almost at people. It did seem she went down better in the room, Ben.
Charlotte, thank you. I know you'll keep us posted from there. LBC reporter Charlotte Lynch at the hustings in Leeds. Now, you might not have a vote in this contest, but here on LBC, you certainly have your say. 0345 6060 973, the number to call to just do exactly that. You can text me on 84850 or tweet at LBC. Lots of texts coming in on this. 4 minutes in, and I'm not impressed, says this person on Twitter. Rishi Sunak's talking about trust, hard work and leadership in the UK, which he's helped to ruin by the corrupt PM that Sunak supported year on year. That is a tweet. Lots and lots of text coming in. Both candidates are continuity candidates and therefore utterly trapped within the far-right dogma of Conservative members. This party has been in power for 12 years and everything seems to be in crisis. What a way to run a country, says Martin. Let's go to your calls now. Let's go to Dewsbury. Abigail's calling from Dewsbury. Abigail, what did you make of what you just heard?
Well, I'd like to say she mentioned Dewsbury. This is why I had to ring you up. She said, right, her words were, yeah, we're going to continue. People voted Conservative because they wanted to continue levelling up. What levelling up? My town, well, I can't say I swear, but I tell you now, right, if there was a bomb that hit this town, it'd be a better job than what's going on. It's terrible. It's like a ghost town. It's horrible. There ain't no levelling up that ever happened up here. So any of these Conservative members that don't come from the big cities, that don't live in their own little lives, the thing that Conservatives are doing everything right, please do come to towns like mine and please show me where this levelling up is. The local Conservative MP blocks you on Twitter if you ask a question politely, doesn't want to know. So where's this levelling up? Because it's certainly not happening in my town.
What did you make of her sort of local references, Abigail? What did you think of her references to Don Revie, her references to Yorkshire farmers and rhubarb and so on? Was that just politicking, or was that quite a smart move?
Well, I thought the Yorkshire farmers, I thought the chairman of the National Farmers Union was saying that this government sold them out. So I laughed at that. I actually laughed at that. She sold them out. She's trying to get cheap imports in. So, this rhetoric that they speak, I don't know if people actually understand what's really going on. I mean, do you know in Leeds? You know Leeds? I don't know if you know Leeds. I know Leeds, right? Let me tell you about Roundhay. It ain't no poor area. It's quite a, wealthy, big, rich area. She ain't from the poor. Please, people, please listen to this. For us up north, we know the area where she's talking about. It's leafy. It's near a nice, lovely park. It's not this incredible poor area she tries to make herself out. No, she's not. So she's.
You were surprised to hear her talking about her school in those terms, Abigail.
Absolutely, and and the problem is not everybody's got local knowledge. Take it from a Yorkshire girl like me. She's talking rubbish.
Thank you, Abigail in Dewsbury. Let's go to Devon. Paul's calling from Crediton. Paul.
Yeah, I think people need reminding about the Rishi Sunak goes about honesty, integrity and all that. But I think they've forgotten about the video and the website that was registered on the December the 23rd, 2021.
Why is that dishonest, Paul? He had ambitions to be Prime Minister. His team registered a website. Is that really dishonest?
Well, I think maybe not dishonest, but I would call it, what's a polite word for it? Backstabbing, perhaps?
You think you don't like the fact that he was secretly plotting to replace Boris Johnson while pretending that he fully supported him?
Well, you had the website set up ready for Richie on December the 23rd, but then on July the 6th, it was changed, but you get automatically directed to that website. And the December the 23rd, I think, was only a few days after the photographs were leaked about the cheese and wine party at number 10.
Okay. Paul, thank you. I think you're right. It was I think it was just before the Partygate story actually started to break, but you might be about right. It was around that time. Dr. Collins text, Dear Ben, listening to those speeches, Rishi Sunak sounded like a statesman. He sounded sensible, sombre, measured, and in my opinion, what the country needs. He's like Angela Merkel. Interesting. Liz Truss sounded to me completely out of depth, but played up to the audience. There was absolutely no mention of the NHS, but she constantly brought up culture war topics like trans issues. She's a Boris Johnson. Dr. Collins says, declaration of interest, I'm a Lib Dem supporter, but think Rishi would be the best of a bad bunch for the country. Tony says, what I will say is I can't trust Dissy Rishi, nor trust me Truss. Neither of them for Tony. Joe says, Truss was definitely better at the opening statement. I feel Rishi is foolish if he thinks he's going to win. Divided opinion on this. Got to say, most texts favouring Liz Truss slightly, but certainly a not unanimous verdict. Let's go to Nick in Ilford. What did you think, Nick? Good evening to you.
Hi there. So, hands up at the beginning. I wanted Kemi to get the job, to be honest with you. I think she would have been perfect. As far as these two, I think Conservatives have made their mind up already. I think they're going to go for Liz Truss, and I think it's going to be their Jeremy Corbyn moment. He's just going to completely make them unelectable for a lot of people.
You don't think she can win a general election?
No, absolutely not.
Why not? Why not, Nick?
She doesn't come across the right way. She's not speaking to enough people, and at least I think, even though Rishi made mistakes, he's done things right with the economy. I don't think Liz Truss has got the way for all to bring the country forward on the economy, and that's what people are more worried about right now.
OK, Nick in Ilford, thank you. Great to speak to you. Joseph says, two very similar candidates. She was slicker than I expected, but it was empty promises. Ultimately, they failed for 12 years, and no one changes their football club, says Joe in Oxbridge, in reference to Liz Truss explaining why she was a Leeds fan who now supports Norwich. Text here, I'm 13 and not a fan of the Conservatives. Until today, I did not know who I thought would be better PM. I think Sunak was talking to the whole country, while Truss was sucking up and kissing the toes of the local audience. I think Sunak is better, says that 13-year-old texter. Certainly thought that Rishi Sunak was, as he's done before, trying to make a broader pitch on issues like the NHS. Liz Truss speaking very much to the party base on issues like trans rights, on issues like free speech, on the dig at Keir Starmer and so on. But ultimately, isn't that the better approach in this? They are the people who are going to decide our next Prime Minister. They are the people who the two candidates have to win over. And yet, of course, what they then have to do, if they want to stay as Prime Minister for longer than 18 months, is win over the country. And the danger for Liz Truss here is she spends so long hitting the notes that she thinks the party base want to hear, that when it comes to October, the wider public, swing voters, people who the Tories need to win back from Labour and the Lib Dems, say, actually, we've heard enough and we don't like what we've heard and we're not going to give her the chance, because she spent the last 6 weeks or so speaking only to the party base and saying what they want to hear. Now, she will inevitably have to pivot, as they both will, back towards the country. But of course, it's going to be harder for her to do that at this stage, because she is the one playing more, I think it's fair to say, to the Tory grassroots. Yet, if you want to be Prime Minister, you would think that was something that Rishi Sunak is going to have to do a bit more of if he wants to turn the current polls around. Just gone 8 o'clock. We will cross live back to Leeds very shortly to hear that grilling by Nick Ferrari of the two candidates. Let's come to that right now. Let's cross back to Leeds.
Hello, sir. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Yes, indeed. OK, thank you. Mr. Sunak, do I detect the smell of burning rubber? have you performed an extraordinary U-turn over your decision with VAT on energy bills? Last week it was unconservative. Now it's a policy. Are you flipping and flopping?
Oh gosh, no, definitely not. There's two very different things here. Now, we've got a short-term problem with energy bills, which I always said as Chancellor we would need to continually make sure that the support we had in place was appropriate for the scale of the challenge that millions of households are facing. Now, we announced quite a lot of support earlier this year on the basis that energy bills would rise to about £2,800. And for the most vulnerable families, that gets to about £1,200 of help. But now, as you can see in the news, people's expectations of what will happen to energy bills in the autumn has gone up. And so it's reasonable that there's more that we can do, and that is the policy that I would put in place if I was elected PM. No, but that is a temporary and time-limited support to help people over the winter and through to next year.
But it was unconservative last week, Mr. Sunak.
No, what's unconservative is permanent unfunded tax cuts. There's a big difference between things that are temporary to help a short-term problem and permanently borrowing 40-50 billion pounds every year and not paying for that. That I think is a big difference.
Without wishing to be too confrontational, you were Chancellor until a few weeks ago. UK growth is set to be the worst in the G20 besides Russia. Another study says we will go from 18th to 31st out of 38 OECD countries. Members here see their pound shrinking, probably as fast as they see their high streets closing. Why should we take financial lessons from you?
Well, if you're picking the 1 year, if you look at actually the period in both of those forecasts, you'll see that we're either the second fastest in the G7 or indeed and much higher in the OECD. So we had a faster recovery than other countries out of COVID, and we were growing faster than last year and this year, and unsurprisingly they're catching up. So if you look at it over the period,
you're actually happy where the economy is.
We're actually no, if you're saying that we're bottom of the pack is what you're trying to allege, right? Yeah. So if you look at over the period, we're actually very much in line or to the top end on the G7. But of course I want to see growth growing, Nick, right? Of course. Now, we have to think about how to do that, because we've had a very narrow conversation so far about tax. And actually, in a 21st century economy, there's many other things that we've got to get right. If you want to grow the economy today, you need to make sure that our financial markets are reformed so we can get businesses the money they need to grow. We need to have a visa regime that attracts the best and brightest from around the world. We need to do regulation differently to make sure that we support people who are trying to create new things. Now, those are some of the ingredients about growth in the 21st century. That's what I think we need to do. That's what I will deliver as Prime Minister. And that starts with getting businesses to invest more in the economy. Right, and actually this autumn what we need to do is reform our business taxes to get business to investing more, to creating better jobs and higher wages. That's the kind of thing that we need to do to drive up those growth rates.
If I were to ask you who's been the best ever leader of the Conservative Party and why, who would you pick?
Probably Margaret Thatcher.
Why?
Why? Because she delivered multiple election victories and changed this country for the better.
You were in Grantham, I think on the weekend, a home of Margaret Thatcher. How would she have responded to the fact that you're the first Chancellor since Labour's Dennis Healey in 1974 to raise corporation tax?
I think she would have responded, as I have done, in gripping inflation first. And if you remember her early budgets and actually what we had to do as a country at that phase, it was, even though it was difficult, she understood that you have to get a grip of inflation first and get a grip of public spending and borrowing. That was very much her mantra, was do that first, because if inflation had run out of control and made everything worse for families, it would have been far more damaging for the economy. And it was only once she had fixed that, once she had got borrowing under control, that she embarked on a programme of supply-side reform, and that is exactly the same path that I want to follow.
She would have supported the high level of corporation tax, you're saying?
You say high level.
It's still 1974.
Right,
we go back.
It's the lowest rate of corporation tax in the G7 group of economies that you just talked about. It's actually the fourth lowest in the G20 group of economies that you also talked about. I don't think anyone can say it's a high level by international standards. But actually, this is the thing. If you want to drive growth in an economy today, you need businesses to invest. And we tried having a very low corporation tax rate as a means to get businesses to invest. And you know what? We didn't just try it for 1 year or 2 years. We've tried it for a decade, and it hasn't worked. So the question is, for people who think that we should have an even lower corporation tax rate, but not have what I'm proposing, which is actual tax cuts on business investment, the question for them is, well, why is that going to drive growth? Because we've tried it for a decade and it hasn't worked. Because businesses haven't invested that money back in the economy. So if you want growth, if you want productivity, if you want better jobs and skills, we need businesses to invest more. So I would cut the taxes on business investment.
And a lot of support in the room. 3 yes or no questions, which I'd ask you to answer with a yes or no and a brief explanation, if you would, just so we get a sense, a little bit more of you. Mr. Sunak, would you support the return of grammar schools?
Yes.
Why?
Well, but as you heard from me earlier, I believe in educational excellence. I believe education is the most powerful way that we can transform people's lives. But I also think there's lots we can do with the school system as we have it. Now, what Michael Gove did several years ago was transformative. And Michael took on some vested interests, challenged consensus, brought in some reforms that mean that millions of our children now are better off. Right? Now, but that's a conservative way to do it. It's not about throwing more money at the problem. It's about reforming the system to get better outcomes, and that's what I would do with education as well.
To our water supply in England, it is now at record pollution levels and in some cases record waste. There is a move that water bosses who continually pollute the water and ignore waste should go to jail. Yes or no?
Well, I think we've just passed a bill that puts very stiff penalties and fines on those company directors and holds them liable for those. I'm not going to give you a yes/no answer to making something a criminal offence in the middle of a leadership campaign, but I do think water companies should be held to a very high standard. We've passed legislation to do that.
But not necessarily imprisoned?
Not necessarily, because I don't know enough to know that that is the right course of action for what is a civil matter, but I do think they should face very stiff penalties, and that's what we've done.
Finally, you talked on this section, you talked a lot about rebuilding trust. Everybody in this room knows so much crime is driven by the drug trade. I have to ask you, have you ever used illegal drugs?
No.
Thank you for that. Let's move on. Your opponent, Liz Truss, has said how she would beat strikes and strikers. How would you?
I think in the same way, because we have a manifesto.
Do explain.
We have a manifesto commitment that I would like to deliver on, which would legislate for a minimum level of service for critical industries like rail. That's something that we've promised to do anyway, and we should get on and do that.
Okay. Can I talk to you a bit about Boris Johnson? The Ukrainian President Zelensky has said, I want him, Mr. Johnson, to be somewhere in politics in a position to be someone. I don't want him to disappear. The decision is in the hands of the British people. Were you to become Prime Minister, would you deploy him as our envoy to Ukraine or something else? And what would his skill set be?
Well, I'm not sure if he'd want to do any of those things, Nick, but he obviously is someone who has enormous talents and I'm sure can continue making a contribution to public life.
So you would support him if he wanted to become the Ukrainian envoy to Ukraine?
I'm not going to sit here and try and allocate jobs to people. I don't think that would be appropriate. But I think actually now we do need to move forward. I've already been clear, I don't see that being a role in the cabinet. But, you know, I'm sure Boris will continue to have a role in public life. He's an extraordinary figure and I'm sure he's got a lot more to give.
So you wouldn't offer him a job?
Not in the cabinet, no.
OK. He spoke today of periods of difficulty being inevitable, and I think we've referenced people will be looking at £500 per month for energy bills. What is to be done?
Well, as we already talked about, there's support that I already announced as Chancellor that will help people through the autumn and winter. It's particularly targeted on the most vulnerable, and we can go further as bills seem now to be higher than people expected earlier, and that's why cutting VAT on fuel will put extra money in people's pockets.
Last question on Boris Johnson, I assure you. It's reported around 14,000 members of the Conservative Party want his name back on the ballot. What would you say to them?
Well, I'd say to them that I think close to 60 people resigned in Parliament, and it's incumbent on the Prime Minister to have the confidence of the parliamentary party, and that wasn't there at the end. So whether he's on the ballot or not, ultimately you need to be able to command the confidence of your MPs in Parliament, and we got to a point where close to 60 of them had resigned from government.
You'll have your questions, sir. I heard something over there. I promise you'll have your time for questions, in fact, in just about 4 or 5 minutes. Mr. Sunak, you've made much of the furlough programme that you introduced, some £70 billion, if I understand. But fraud runs at, I understand, £15.7 billion. How does that make you fiscally responsible? By my maths, that's around 20%.
That's completely wrong.
Those figures are wrong?
Completely wrong. There was a report that was published just the other day that shows that the percentage of fraud and error in the furlough programme, it looks like it is now even lower than the fraud and error in normal government
That comes
schemes.
from the Public Affairs Accounts Committee.
Literally, HMRC just published a report the other week.
All right, we'll check that.
So you can go and check that.
We will.
Yep. So
You wanted to crack down on COVID fraud. You set up, I understand, a task force with 1,000 investigators, costing £100 million. How much has that brought back?
I think, well, I'm not there anymore, actually, Nick.
Well, it wasn't that long ago.
No, but it was on course to collect, I think, over £1 billion, and I'm not sure how much of that had already happened. It may be that it's doing better than that.
Over £1 million, did you say?
£1 billion.
£1 billion?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So you're hoping to get around £1 billion back?
As I said, when I was there, that was what it was projected to do.
Okay. There's something about image in politics, whether you like it or not. You have Prada shoes. You have photo opportunities with a car that's not yours, and you seem to have trouble paying for the petrol. You pull pints for the cameras even though you're teetotal, and you kept a green card while living in Downing Street. What does that make you look? What does that say to the Conservative Party members?
Well, actually, I think, as I've talked about this in the past, I think this is not about what shoes I wear or what suit I'm wearing. This is about what I'm going to be able to do for the country. And thank you. So we're a party that celebrates hard work and aspiration and wealth creation. Those are the values that I will champion as Prime Minister.
Some reports suggest, going back to COVID, that your Eat Out to Help Out programme led to, some reports suggest, a 17% spike in COVID infections. With hindsight, which is great, of course, was it a mistake?
No.
God forbid. Would you do something like that again?
I mean, if you think what happened is almost every country in Europe ended up having exactly the same spike in infections thereafter. Every single one of them ended up putting more restrictions in place afterwards. So it's hard to say that that was the difference. But I tell you what was the situation at the time. We had a situation where 2 million jobs in hospitality were at risk. And we had an industry which was on the brink of mass bankruptcies. We had a situation in this country where people were far more fearful of going out again because of various reasons, more so than any other country. And I did not want those jobs to be lost because disproportionately that industry employs people who are on lower incomes, who are younger, who are from difficult backgrounds, who are moving off unemployment. So actually, as a matter of social justice, for me, those 2 million jobs were really important to try and save.
I sense the last question from me, or certainly the last but one. I think you'd probably allow that your senior colleague Ben Wallace would bring a lot of support to your campaign or to your opponents. If Mr. Wallace were to be watching now, what would you say to the Defence Secretary to bring about him to support you?
No, I'm sure Ben will make up his own mind. But when it comes to the topic more broadly of defence spending, I was the Chancellor that supported Ben with the largest uplift in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, and we did that before we had settled any other department in the middle of COVID because it was incredibly important. And I was also the Chancellor that ensured that we supported Ben to get £2 billion worth of support to Ukraine to stand up to Russian aggression.
You know I'm going to hold you to a number. We heard earlier that your opponent would look at a 3% increase over a period of time. Can I get a number from you, Mr. Sunak?
No, because I don't believe in arbitrary targets. And what I've said is our approach to defence spending should be threat-based. And if Ben Wallace was here, if you told him, Ben, I'm going to give you 3% tomorrow, what would you do with it? He would tell you, I can't spend it, is what he would do if you told him that, and if he was sitting here, because that's what he's told me in the past. But I will spend whatever it takes to keep our country safe. And I'm not going to sit here and get into some auction of more tax cuts and higher targets.
Okay. On a lighter note, prediction for the football on Sunday, England v Germany?
Der Klassik, as it's being called. Yes.
Oh, well done.
Well, there we go. Yeah, no, well, you know, Lions victory, here we come.
A Lions win?
Obviously. I mean...
Okay. When did you last go to a women's pro game?
Gosh, when did I... No, I don't know, actually. I don't know. I'm a Saints fan, and that's my team. The last football match I went to in this job was the European finals.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Round of applause, please, for Mr. Sunak taking my questions. More importantly... Thank you, Mr. Sunak.
Thank you.
Right, now, who's got a question, please? Right, OK, there's a lady there in a blue and white striped top. No, you've been usurped. One of the two... No, it is the lady in the blue and white top. Let's start the clock now. Just your first name, if you would, and your question to Mr. Sunak.
Hi.
Say your name again. I'm so sorry.
It's Laura.
Laura, go ahead, Mr. Sunak.
Hi. Will you...
Whatever you want, sir.
Okay.
Whatever you feel comfortable.
Will you outright ban greyhound racing, or at least consider the ban, considering it is a vile and abusive sport?
Well, to be perfectly honest, it's not something that I've looked into in any great detail. So, I'm happy to look at all our laws to make sure that we're treating animals properly. As
Laura, in a sentence, why should it be banned? In a sentence, if you would.
Because thousands and thousands of dogs are abused every year, and are culled, and for every three that's on a every one that's on a track, 2 have died.
Right, that's a horrific... I mean, in fairness, Mr. Sunak, it's not a question even I've heard often, but it's something
you know what, as I said, I'm happy to look into it. For the first time, I'm a dog owner, because a year ago my kids and wife conspired against me and we got a new dog for the first time in my life, so I am happily in your camp.
I trust you're a dog lover now.
Now I am a dog lover.
Yeah.
So
don't lose the audience.
No. Well, it was the best thing that happened to our family in a long time, so it's very good. So I'm very much happy to look into that, because obviously now that Nova is a part of our life, the idea that someone would be abusive to dogs is something that I find personally obviously very difficult.
May I ask the breed, Nova's breed? What is it?
She's a Fox Red Lab.
Fox Red Lab. OK, sir. White blazer to your left, Mr. Sunak. Your name, sir?
Yeah, thank you. Rishi, I'm a councillor for Selby District Council, Business and Communities, very passionate about businesses. And how do you feel about keeping the small business relief, as so many businesses so rely on it? If you became Prime Minister, would you consider scrapping that or continuing it? Because I think a lot of businesses, particularly on the high street, would close without that relief, particularly after COVID.
Yes, you know, you're totally right, and that's why as Chancellor I made sure that this year there's a 50% discount on business rates for retail and hospitality businesses to help them recover from COVID, because they are the beating hearts of all our high streets. And as you heard me talk about Eat Out to Help Out earlier, I'm a passionate supporter of high streets in the hospitality industry. But we also can do some other things. We need to make sure that digital companies are paying fair taxes. And as Chancellor, I organise a deal with lots of other countries to ensure that our large online companies pay fair taxes to level the playing field. Thank you. And we also need to support businesses to grow, which is why I created a programme called Help to Grow, so that small and medium-sized businesses can get management training and mini MBAs and figure out how to use new software to help their businesses make more money and grow. So that's how, in a new 21st century economy, we've got to support your businesses, help them to grow, and that's what I'll do as PM.
All right. Mr. Sunak, you stay seated. I'm going to get up to work at the back of the room, but while I do, take a question if you would. Lady in a grey top, your name if you would first, please.
Teresa.
Hello, Teresa.
Hello, Mr. Sunak. What I'm interested in is how you're going to control the illegal immigration. With the dinghies coming over, a civil service that doesn't want to actually cooperate, a border force that doesn't want to turn boats around, Macron who's emptying his country. So we can't afford it, and we've also got a processing issue of a big backlog. So I'd like to hear in detail how you're going to do it.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad you asked the question, because as you heard me in my opening remarks, that's one of the things that I want to grip as quickly as possible as PM. And if you've got 5 minutes when you go home tonight, find my website. There's a video that I've put out that explains a very detailed 10-point plan on how to do it. So some of the things that we need to do quickly. What we need to do is change the definition of what counts as asylum, and we should move away from the very expansive ECHR definition, which allows people to claim all sorts of spurious reasons for being here, and move to the tighter definition under something called the Refugee Convention, as other countries do. That will help us ensure that we can remove people when we want to. Secondly, we should make our foreign policy more linked to people taking back failed asylum seekers. If we're going to trade with countries on a preferential basis, if we're going to provide aid to countries, they really should be taking back asylum seekers that we want to make sure are not here anymore. That's not happening currently. We need to improve the current system because it takes far too long to get people through it. We can use technology to help us do that, but we also need to look at our rates of rejection and acceptance. And if you compare us to all the other countries in Europe, subject to all the same rules, somehow we reject far fewer asylum seekers than all those other countries. So something is not working in the system, and I will get a grip of that as well. But look, if you've got 5 minutes, go home. There's a 10-point plan that I've put out in a video. But I'm the product, as I said, of this country's compassionate, welcoming embrace to millions of people over the years. Of course we're going to keep doing that, but we must have a system of control for our borders. Immigration should be legal, it should be orderly, it should be controlled, and that's what I'll deliver.
And just on a final point, under your Prime Ministership, how many people do you think you would manage to get to Rwanda, to the programme there, and in what time span, Mr Sunak?
Well, that's a right policy, but we do need to make it work. And over time, I hope it can be scaled up. But it's right that we start with a pilot.
Gone. It can't be scaled down. No one's gone.
Well, that's because, that's because we've got challenges, as we always knew we had. And when we've designed that policy...
But you believe it can work? You believe you will be able to, under your watch, you will get people to Rwanda, but you'll decline to give me a number?
Well, because we have to build it up over time, right? So, but it's part of it is a new Bill of Rights that we're actually about to put through Parliament. Part of it is my idea to change the definition, and I said there's other things that we can do that will.
You might want to swing round.
Right, who have we got over here?
With a blue. Oh, there we go. He's got your name on the T-shirt.
There we go.
I don't know how that happened, but there we go.
Rishi, we're out of the European Union, but we're seeing a real threat to our own union with a lot of sabre rattling in regard to Scotland. How are you going to keep Scotland in the UK?
Yeah, no, look, that's absolutely vital question. And we're under real risk. The most, the best things we can do are be firm with Nicola Sturgeon about another referendum. We need to make sure that in government in Whitehall that we don't just devolve and forget, which for many years has been the institutional imperative where we just push things over to them and then we forget about it. Now, we as UK government ministers have to be more active in Scotland. We have to be more active about delivering benefits on the ground to the people in Scotland and working constructively there to do that. And crucially, when you're countering nationalism, we can't just talk in arguments to do with our head. Now, it's easy to talk about borrowing and debt and trade and pensions and currency, but ultimately nationalism is a seductive and romantic idea. So we have got to make arguments about the union that speak to people's hearts and speak to their emotions, because if we focus just on the practicalities, we will not be successful. And I think we can do that, because my grandparents, when they emigrated here, they didn't emigrate to England. They didn't emigrate here because it was geography or lines on a map. They emigrated to the United Kingdom, and that's because it represented a set of values and ideas, and it's those values and ideas that are precious and that form the bonds of union, and those are the values which we must defend.
When Nicola Sturgeon says Boris Johnson has done great damage to the United Kingdom, the union, is she right?
Well, Boris Johnson has made sure, actually, that we passed a piece of legislation that allows us now, for the first time, to actively go and do things in Scotland and demonstrate the benefit of the union in places like Scotland. He deserves credit for that, and that is now allowing us to do something that we could never do before, and it's making a real difference on the ground.
So where should the Northern Ireland trade border be?
We don't need to have a border in Northern Ireland. We should have free-flowing trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and we should have free-flowing trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland.
But it's not working currently.
And that's what we need to fix, and we will fix it.
And you'll fix it in a sentence, how?
Yes, we will.
But how?
We've got a bill in Parliament that will fix it.
That you're confident that will work?
Yes.
We have a question. Gentleman in a blue suit, I think. Sir.
Good evening. Thank you.
Your name, if you would, your first name.
Henry from Tatton in Cheshire, just on the edge of Manchester Airport. This party has been brilliant in its vision for the Northern Powerhouse, for net zero and for levelling up. But this isn't being delivered and isn't at the centre of this campaign. And the Treasury seems to view the North as a cost, not a great value for money investment. Please give us the detail on how you will secure green investment and growth to truly deliver net zero and levelling up in partnership with local communities and businesses.
So Henry, I'm going to actually completely disagree with you, right? So I've been in charge of the Treasury for the last 2.5 years. I'm the most northern Chancellor that this party has had for something like 70-odd years. I'm the Chancellor that put the Treasury in Darlington, not just in the north, but also not in a big city where everyone expected it to go, but to a place like Darlington to demonstrate our commitment to it. I'm the Chancellor that signed off on the largest investment in rail infrastructure across the north. Right? I'm also the Chancellor that you talked about green energy, created a free port using the freedoms that we had from Brexit to come up with a brand new policy that right now in Teesside is attracting investment and jobs in the industries of the future, in offshore wind, in hydrogen, in carbon capture and storage. And if you just think back 5 years ago to a place like Teesside, we had lost a steel plant. 5,000 people lost their jobs. And you look at it now, it's a place that is brimming with opportunity and optimism about the future. Now, I work with people like Ben Houchin and local people there to help deliver that, and I want to bring that same degree of optimism and excitement across this country and across the North. I've done it as Chancellor, and I will definitely do it as Prime Minister.
All right. Would you support relocating the House of Lords in the North? Oh, and why not?
Because I don't think it makes sense for the practical operation of government for us to be separated.
We go over this side of the room. Gentleman in a blue shirt. Your name, sir?
Stuart.
Hello, Stuart.
Hi, Stuart.
Hi, Rishi. At the tail end of your chancellorship, you had differences of view with Johnson about finances. However, Johnson supported Ukraine right from the front, and he led this country. Would you do all that it takes to support Ukraine so that we defeat Putin?
The quick answer is absolutely yes. And I made sure that we got the funding across government to provide to Ukraine to get them the arms they needed to stand up to Putin. I worked with Ben to prioritise funding so that he could do that. But I also worked with all my finance ministers around the world to put together a sanctions package, the likes of which we have never seen. And you all know those sanctions are all economic in nature. They target the central bank's reserves, they target gold, they target Russian companies, they target their access to international capital markets, right? So those are all things that I worked on with Janet Yellen, with my fellow colleagues in Europe, because they work better when we do them together. So I think I've got a track record of making sure that we genuinely support Ukraine, not just directly with arms, but also that we tighten the vice on Russia to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. That's what I did as Chancellor, and I can assure you that I will continue to do that as PM.
You mentioned Vladimir Putin. Were you to meet him face-to-face as Prime Minister, what would you say, Mr. Sunak?
I mean, there's at this point not much to be said. I mean, what we need to do is put Ukraine in the strongest possible position so that they can sit down.
I mean, some people say there's a lot, say stop. Some people say.
I think we've said that already, right? So
Okay.
I think we need action, not words at this point. And the action we need is the toughest possible sanctions to make life as difficult for him as possible, and the strongest possible support for Ukraine so that they can defend themselves and push back. Now, if we do both of those things, we put Ukraine in the strongest position to then try and find a resolution to the conflict.
And to those who say it's Russia who in some way is benefiting from some of those sanctions, how would you respond? Is that a fair critique?
We need to find ways to do the sanctions in a more intelligent way, because ultimately...
They're not intelligent now?
Well, the problem with energy prices at the moment, we're all seeing it, we're all paying very high energy prices. So we are all paying a price, that is how we are all sacrificing to support Ukraine, and Russia is still able to make money from the energy, because in the short term, the prices are very high, and we haven't been able to completely remove ourselves from it.
Okay.
So, but what we can do, actually, and one of the things I was working on with my colleagues to smarter sanctions, is to look at whether we could put in place a price cap. So actually, if we could have a buyer's cartel in the world where everyone would agree to pay a fixed amount for Russian energy and enforce that through secondary sanctions, which we were working on how to do, that would be a way to make sure we get the energy we need at prices that are far better for us and deprive Russia of revenue that is funding its war effort. Now, that is not an easy thing to do, but that is the kind of evolution in the sanctions that we should try and do.
All right, thank you for that. We're going to stay with the right-hand side of the room geographically, I assure you. Gentleman, again, in a blue shirt, I think, sir. Your name, if you would.
Good evening, I'm Matthew from West Yorkshire.
Hello, mate.
Rishi Sunak, you're a good salesman and you have many strong attributes, but many people continue to support Boris Johnson, who has delivered consistently through treacherous waters, and many people unfortunately see that you've stabbed him in the back. He is the man who made you as a senior politician, and some people don't want to see that in number 10. You're going to have to take the party and the country through another general election, and You know, I'm not quite sure entirely which planet you're on. David Davis, neither. How do you expect to take the party through the next general election based upon those actions? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you, Matthew, for asking the question. So why did I resign? It was a very difficult decision. It wasn't one I took lightly. And you're right, I'm very grateful to the PM for giving me the job of Chancellor. But as you also saw over the past 2.5 years, I gave my everything to that job. And I'm proud of my record as Chancellor, delivering for this country, delivering for all of you, and made sure that we got through coronavirus. I also was proud to be part of his government that achieved many things. And as I said previously, I do believe he was the only person who could have broken the Brexit gridlock and delivered that election victory. But for me personally, it got to a point where I couldn't stay. As the gentleman previously also said, I had a significant difference of opinion with him on how to handle the economic challenges that are ahead of us. And at a situation like that, there was absolutely no way I could stay. Right? There is no way that a Prime Minister and Chancellor cannot be joined at the hip with regard to economic policy, particularly at a time when the economy faces real challenges. So I was left with no choice but to resign, and I'm sad that I had to, but that was the right thing to do, and that was me acting on my principles. Now, you ask about bringing the party back together. Now, that is a fair question, and that's the right question. So all I'd point you in the direction of is look at the support that I've drawn. I have the largest support across the parliamentary party, and that support is drawn from every part of the parliamentary party. It's drawn from people who supported Brexit, people who supported Remain, people in the north, people in the south, people in rural areas, people in urban areas, MPs who have been around for a very long time and are very senior, and new MPs. So I'm confident that I am well placed to bring the party back together because I've already drawn support from across the party, and I will build a team that draws on all the talents and traditions of our parliamentary party, because the challenges that our country faces right now are too great for us not to do that and build the best possible team to meet them, and that's what I will do.
You are aware you're trailing Liz Truss in the ratings at the moment to be leader of the party.
I did mention that, Nick, earlier on.
So you are aware of that, though, the hill that must be climbed. Just to the sentiment, did you stab Boris Johnson in the back, lastly, on that question?
I resigned because the Prime Minister and Chancellor cannot be on a different place when it comes to economic policy, and we were due to try and outline an economic policy for the country going forward.
So it wasn't an act of treachery?
And everyone knows there was a speech that was due to be given, and as we were talking about what should go into that speech, it was clear we had very different points of view. And so I was left with no choice.
Last couple of minutes together. A young lady in a black top. No, sir, I'm afraid it's a young lady in a black top. Thank you. Your name?
Hi Rishi, my name's Annabelle, and on paper I should have probably have voted Labour. I come from a single parent household, I'm a working class woman, and one thing that really got my mum through hard times was benefits. Now, a lot of people see benefits as a long-term pay packet instead of a short-term solution like my mother did. So what would you do to stop benefits getting into the wrong hands for lazy people who just want to sit on their backside all day? And how would you ensure that it gets to people that really need it?
I think the last bit, ensure it gets to people who really need it, was it?
Yes.
Thank you. Annabelle, well, nice to see you, and amazing job for your mum. I don't know if she's here or not, but that's an incredibly tough thing that she's done, and she's obviously brought up an amazingly confident daughter, so enormously to her credit. Now, I completely agree with you. And just before I was leaving as Chancellor, I spent time trying to figure out how to tighten up our benefit system, because right now we've got more people claiming unemployment benefit than we had before coronavirus, and yet we've got an economy that is crying out for workers. Now that can't be right, and that's why I, as Chancellor, pushed the departments to find ways to change things. We used to have a system where people could sit around for months before taking a job and nothing would happen to them. That was wrong, and we changed that to be a matter of weeks. The next thing I want to change is something else that you will all be shocked to hear. So if you're claiming unemployment benefit, if you work just 9 hours on the minimum wage, you are then freed of all the conditions, all the obligations on you to check in at your job centre, to take more work. Nothing happens to you if you say no. Now that clearly is wrong, because people like your mum, who are working really, really hard, those are the people we need to support. So as Prime Minister, I will completely change that threshold. I've already said I would double it. Because if you're taking money from the taxpayer at a time when the economy needs workers and we need to combat inflation, you should be taking the jobs that are on offer. So I think as Conservatives, that's our approach. We need to do exactly that.
We're going...
Right, okay.
One more.
We got one more.
We have time for one more. We've got about just a minute and a bit. Sir, blue shirt, blue blazer, green trousers. An interesting combination.
Yes.
Wow.
Thank you, Norman Hartnell.
Yeah. Well done, sir. Well done.
Well, my
name is Derek from Godson County, Lancashire, Bury in Lancashire.
Well done, Derek.
In 1975, Margaret Thatcher appointed a very senior past politician, really, in Peter Thornycroft as party chairman. He served as chairman of the party for 6 years. I can think of a very good Yorkshireman who would serve a similar role if he could be persuaded. How about it?
OK. For some of us, let us in on the secret, Mr. Sunak.
I think the gentleman's talking about my predecessor, William Hague.
Ah, right, yes,
so
how much love is there in the room for Mr. Hague? Mr. Sunak.
William is one of the greatest Conservative politicians, leaders and statesmen that we've ever had. He's also been an incredibly kind supporter to me, and I've got nothing but respect and admiration for him. But you are a better man than I if you think we can persuade him back into politics in the front line. But it would be enormously beneficial to all of us if he was open to that, and I'll ask him. So what about that?
That's fair enough. Derek, thank you for your question and having a sense of humour. And I'm sorry we have strict time limits. Could I please ask, ladies and gentlemen, members, your appreciation, please. Rishi Sunak.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sunak. Thank you very much. Thank you. OK, sir. See you again.
Ferrari there interviewing
Okay,
Rishi
just to remind you,
Sunak.
thank you
Liz
very much
Truss
indeed.
is,
Liz
of
Truss
course,
will be
up next in just a moment. Text flooding in on what you've just heard. Adil Ray saying on Twitter, Sunak sounded the strongest he's been throughout his campaign on LBC. Is this a turning point? He is wondering. Susie on Twitter says, listen to the hustings from Leeds. If I wasn't actually watching, I would think I was listening to Tony Blair. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? You might ask. No to Rishi Sunak, says Susie. She clearly thinks it is a bad thing. Let's go back to Leeds. Nick Ferrari about to speak to Liz Truss as the second part of this debate gets underway.
A powerful entrance there. Lovely. I thought I was going to get a kiss there. No, we'll leave that away. Well, all right. Well, there we go. While I've had a kiss from someone who's going to lead the Conservative Party, but that's another story. Thank you very much indeed. Question number one, Liz Truss. In February, the Kremlin put Russian nuclear forces on high alert due to some comments that you made. If you were Prime Minister, would you accidentally walk us into World War III?
The fact that Russia have spread propaganda about me is, I think, a sign that the strength the United Kingdom has shown in leading the free world in the fight against Russia and supporting Ukraine has had a real impact. And I take it as a badge of pride that I've been sanctioned by the Russian regime. We have stood up to Russia, and we've not just stood up ourselves, we've encouraged our allies in the free world to stand up to this appalling regime. And it's completely wrong to listen to any of the saber-rattling or propaganda. The reason they're doing that is that Putin's evil plans to take Kyiv in a few days didn't work. And we were at the forefront of exposing the intelligence, showing what he was up to, disclosing Russia's plans that helped the Ukrainians, but it also helped us win the global argument.
I hear you, but I remind you, nuclear forces. Did not that not concern you, Liz Truss?
Well, look, I don't believe that listening to Russian propaganda and repeating it helps deliver the Ukrainians' victory against Russia. Putin has said all kinds of things. There's been all kinds of saber-rattling. But what we've seen is that when the United Kingdom and the West have taken a tough stance, he has retreated. So, for example, he said there'd be terrible consequences if Finland and Sweden joined NATO. We were at the front of the pack helping them join NATO. Nothing has happened. So we've got to not take what he says seriously and look at what Russia did. And the fact is that the West was asleep for too many years.
Okay.
We didn't do enough about Crimea. We didn't do enough about the Donbass. And if we don't stand up to him now, he will come back for more.
All right. You won't need reminding. Perhaps some of our listeners or viewers or people in the room, you had senior roles under Theresa May, Justice Secretary, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and Boris Johnson, International Trade Secretary, and of course Foreign Secretary. You said earlier that you're straight talking. Here's a straight question. Who was better?
Well, I've served 3 different prime ministers. I also worked for David Cameron as well as Theresa May. Look, put it this way, in the 2016 leadership election after the referendum, I backed Boris first, and then I backed Theresa May once Boris had left the race. I've always been a fan of Boris Johnson. I think he did a fantastic job as Prime Minister. He delivered Brexit, he delivered on the vaccine, and I was proud to serve as a loyal member of his cabinet.
All right, I'll take Boris as your suggestion. Can I talk to you about inheritance tax, Liz Truss? Last year, the Treasury received a record £5.4 billion from the duty. The Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, says that could rise to a whisker under £7 billion in a couple of years' time. Many people call it a death tax. What would you do about inheritance tax?
Well, I think our tax system in Britain isn't working. It's too complicated. It's even more complicated than the American tax system, which we know is a nightmare. So what I would do is have a complete review of the tax system. I want to make it fairer for families. So if people take time out of work to look after children or elderly relatives, they're not penalised. And I would also look at inheritance tax as part of that review, because I've said earlier...
What would you mean look at, Liz?
Well, I mean I'd look at the overall tax system in the round and make sure it's fair. And my view of fairness is we need to reward people who do the right thing, who work hard, who set up businesses, who earn money, and who want to pass it on to their children. So I would look at it again, but I need to look at it in the round. I've already made some immediate tax commitments, reversing the national insurance increase, keeping corporation tax low to attract investment into the United Kingdom. But I would look at the entire tax system, make it simpler, and make it fairer for people who do the right thing.
Does this not underscore what some critics say, in that you're promising a lot of tax cuts? You're talking about looking at inheritance tax. You promised the good folk of Leeds a metro if you can get there earlier this evening. Some economists say your figures just don't add up. You haven't got enough money to bring in. How would you respond?
Well, first of all of the tax reductions I've promised are costed. We have £30 billion available headroom in the budget. We'll still be able to start paying down the debt in 3 years. But it's a false economy to raise taxes because it can cut off growth. And we know that. We know what Britain was like in the 1970s when we had high tax rates, we had minimum militant trade unions, is it choked off economic growth and it led to a recession. So I don't agree with those people who say you can just keep raising tax and the money will keep rolling in. What will happen is people won't want to go out to work. Companies won't want to invest in the United Kingdom. So we have to do things differently. We have to be bold. We've had slow economic growth for the last 2 decades. That's why we need to be different. But of course, I will be responsible, which is why I'm looking overall at the tax system in the round. But I've made some immediate pledges that are fully costed. And what's more, they keep in turn with our manifesto commitment. Okay. I believe in doing what you say you will do. And I think it is wrong, and I raised this in Cabinet at the time, it's wrong to renege on a manifesto commitment when we had the money to afford that extra finance for the NHS
you
and social care.
You would never renege on a manifesto commitment?
I would only do it, and I'm being completely honest with you, Nick.
No, of course.
You know, if there was something that we absolutely had to do, for example, for national security reasons or for some massive priority, and there were some things we had to do as a result of the COVID crisis. Right. But in the case of the national insurance commitment, we didn't have to make that change, and we did, and that was wrong.
Okay. A handful of yes-no questions and a brief response, a brief reason, if you would. To those people who have complained, Love Island is misogynistic bullying and needs reining in, does it?
Well, all I can say is I watched it for 10 minutes with my teenage daughter, and I was completely horrified, and I turned it off.
And was your daughter equally horrified?
Unfortunately not, and I'm quite worried. I'm quite worried she's gone off to watch it on her own, but she's actually in the audience, so I won't embarrass her anymore.
OK, let's move on. You once told me some months ago that you thought any British football team should boycott the Champions League football final in Moscow. Noting the human rights abuses in Qatar, should England and Wales go to the World Cup later this year?
We should go to the World Cup. What we have seen in Russia invading a sovereign country was completely beyond the pale. Now, not every country in the world has exactly the same standards as the United Kingdom. And if we insisted that every country we did business with, or we traded with, or we attended a football match in, had the same standards as the United Kingdom, we wouldn't be doing business with many countries, frankly. So we've got to be practical, we've got to be pragmatic. But what Russia did to Ukraine was beyond the pale.
OK. Last on the yes or no's and brief responses. Again, we all know it's a driver of crime and huge problems in inner cities and elsewhere. I have to ask you, have you ever used illegal drugs?
No, I haven't.
You become Prime Minister. There's another famous Elizabeth in the country. That would be the Queen. What would you say to her if, when you had your first audience, she reminded you that in 1994, as a Lib Dem, you voted for the abolition of the monarchy?
Well, I have to say, Nick, that I have met the Queen in the various roles that I've had, and she has been far too polite to raise what I have previously said.
What do you make of your views?
Almost as soon as I made the speech, I regretted it. I was a bit of a teenage controversialist, and just within these four walls, I was briefly...
No one's listening or watching. Don't worry, Liz.
I was briefly a member of the Liberal Democrats. I did leave it when I was 21, when I came of age and realised the error of their ways.
All right. Another question I've asked before. Who's the best leader of the Conservative Party of all time, and why?
Mrs. Thatcher.
And why?
Because she...
I sense again there's some agreement in the room.
She turned our country around. You know, in the 1970s, we were the sick man of Europe. We had low growth. We had massive industrial problems. I mean, I was born in 1975, so I was very young at the time. I didn't see it, but you know, you can watch the newsreels, you can see how appalling it was. And what I sensed in the 1980s is a growing sense of pride in our country and a growing sense of optimism about the future. And I think the pinnacle was when we saw the Berlin Wall fall, and we saw the freedom and democracy and the pride in our values influencing the rest of the world. And you know, she was a tremendous leader, a really world-changing leader. And you know, I'm very, very proud that she was our Prime Minister.
Can I talk to you about the cost of living crisis? You'll be aware, but let me share with the audience here and the audience listening and watching, there have been some breathtaking figures for Shell profits. Quarterly profits, £9.5 billion. To put that in context, it was £4.5 billion last year, so it's more than double. Time for another windfall tax.
I don't believe in windfall taxes because they put off future investment. What we should be doing is encouraging Shell and other companies to invest in the United Kingdom, because we need to get our productivity up. We need capital investment. What I would do is create low tax investment zones, encouraging those companies to invest in our country. I think windfall taxes send the wrong message to the world. They don't send the message that Britain is open for business. And actually what we need to be doing now is using more of our North Sea reserves to help people with the cost of living. And that's what I would do alongside having a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy to really help people with their bills.
It's worth noting you worked for 4 years at Shell. What did you learn from your time there?
Well, I did two different jobs. I was in the petrol industry in Britain, so I'd spent a lot of time at refineries. And I also worked in the liquid natural gas industry, which is now very fashionable. I was in it when it wasn't fashionable and no one knew what it was. But what I learned was how important the security of our energy is, and how we shouldn't take it for granted. And I think that it's very important in the future that we never again become dependent on regimes that we can't trust. That is what's happened with Russia, less so for the UK than other European countries, but we need to learn that lesson for China as well. And we shouldn't be, you know, whether it's critical minerals, whether it's oil and gas, we've got to be very careful because these are strategic industries and we need to make sure that the UK has resilient supplies from countries that we can trust.
Last year, you voted to effectively rework parliamentary rules to support Owen Paterson. We know what that did for Boris Johnson's reputation. Why did you do that? And do you regret it?
I think we all know that it was a mistake.
For you to vote that way?
Shouldn't, for me to vote that way, as well as the government, to make that decision. And no, I wouldn't do it again if I had my time again. And what we know is there's a real need to improve discipline in the Conservative Party, but also to support the welfare of our MPs. It's a tough job being an MP. I know there's not a lot of tiny violins in this audience today, but you know, they do get a lot of abuse. You know, my colleagues get a lot of abuse on Twitter. They have to put up with quite a lot. So I want to support our MPs more, but also I want to make sure that when there is a problem, we deal with it early and we deal with it quickly. And one of the things I would do as Prime Minister is move the Whip's office back into number 12 Downing Street. They were moved out of number 12 Downing Street by Alistair Campbell and replaced by the press office, which shows the priorities of the Blair government. But we need to show that parliamentary democracy is what matters to us, and MPs are important, and we need that restoration of standards, discipline, but also support.
If you're able to, I'd love you to do two quick questions in the 1 minute I have left remaining. A lot of people suggest Ben Wallace could bring a lot of support to whoever candidate. What would you say to the Defence Secretary to support your campaign, Liz Truss?
Well, I've worked very closely with the Defence Secretary over the Russia-Ukraine crisis. You know, he is incredibly impressive. He has led not just the UK, but also the rest of the free world in making sure Ukraine has the weapons they need. And also, he's right about the defence budget.
But why should
we do need to increase the defence budget. Okay. Well, look, I'm not going to tell Ben Wallace what to do, and believe me, he doesn't like being told what to do. So I think the best thing is to leave him to make his own decision. But, you know, I'm a huge fan of his. He's done a great job at defence.
Got to ask you, a score prediction for Sunday's big game, England v Germany.
It's going to be 2-0 to England.
Love it.
And by the way, I'm planning to attend with the German foreign minister, so there'll be massive egg on my face if that doesn't come to fruition.
Okay. And when did you last go to a women's football game?
A few years ago. A few years ago, I went to Wembley.
Okay, all right. I hope you have a successful. We'll all be pulling for you, I know, and the England team on that. Your appreciation before your questions. Liz Truss, please.
Thank you.
Stand, we're going to take questions now. And now it is over to you, and there is a lady with a floral jacket, and your name, if you would, madam.
Rosemary.
Hello, Rosemary. Your question to Liz Truss.
I live in Seacroft, which is one of the poorest areas in Leeds.
I know it well.
How will your government put children at the heart of policy making to ensure, firstly, that they are given all the support they need to recover from the experiences of the last 2.5 years, and secondly, to ensure that the harms done to our children over the past 2.5 years are never, ever repeated?
Well, first of all, you know, you are right. We should not have closed our schools, and I think it has caused a great deal of damage to children. And what we need to do is help children. So first of all, I would make sure we are supporting children in the early years, which are incredibly important. We need kids who get to school to be able to count, to be able to read, to be able to do all those basic things so they can benefit from a primary education. We need to focus more on getting English and math standards up. It's still a case that 1/3 of our kids, when they leave primary school, do not have basic English and maths. And if you get to 11 without the basic skills, you are going to struggle later on in life to get a job. And look, I've got 2 daughters who were out of school during COVID. I know it was very, very tough for them. I know a lot of teenagers in particular are suffering from mental health issues. I'd want more mental health support available in schools, but also in GP surgeries to help children. And we need to put the extra effort in. I support the tutoring scheme. I think that was excellent. We need to do more of that. We need to make up for lost time with our children, because if we don't do that, we'll face real problems later on.
Thank you for your question. Ms. Truss, a lot of... Yes, indeed, show your appreciation or otherwise, of course. A lot of experts say that schools were vectors of infection. Wasn't it necessary for the safety of the school staff, the teachers, the caretakers, and the pupils? You say no.
Well, there was a time, I think I remember, during COVID when we kept the pubs open, but the schools were closed. And much as I love going to the pub, I probably think it is less necessary in a crisis than keeping schools closed. And there was a huge knock-on effect on the economy, on parents, and I think we could have done things differently. But look, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and the Prime Minister did his absolute best.
I just wanted to put the scientific question to you. Thank you for that response. Dark suit, sir, your name?
Good evening, everyone, and good evening, Liz. My name is Dieter.
Hello, Dieter.
Hello, Dieter. 2 questions, very small. One is the difference between North and South divide and levelling up. We know there have been cuts in HS2 rail links. What would you do if you become a Prime Minister to change the cuts which have been made, and some cities, including my city, has been treated unfairly?
Second you're question in Leeds, I assume, sir, are you?
Bradford.
You're in Bradford, I'm sorry, yes, OK.
Bradford.
Can I just take one question? Would you be awfully offended, or did you have is it a long question that you have,
It's
sir?
regarding VAT for small businesses. The VAT threshold, which has remained £85,000 and has been fixed for next 2 years. Would you be able to change that, especially post-Brexit? Post-COVID, the small businesses have been suffering heavily.
I'm very grateful for the question. Can we start with levelling up the North, HS2, and the cities that have been left behind, Ms. Truss?
What I would do for Bradford is proceed with the Northern Powerhouse Rail, which I think will make a massive difference. And as a teenager, I used to go to Bradford to visit the ice rink. I'm a keen ice skater, and the connection between Leeds and Bradford is not good enough, and the rest of the north of England. I've also said that West Yorkshire really suffers from not having better commuter transport. It is appalling that, and we've all been stuck in traffic jams today, frankly, and we know it's holding back opportunity and growth. And the other thing I want to do is level up in a Conservative way by having low tax zones to attract investment in areas that have been left behind. So we level the playing field, but we level the playing field through enterprise, through business, and more small business is absolutely crucial to that. On VAT, we need to review the overall system of business rates. We need to look at issues like VAT. I do it as an overall part of the tax review, but my reductions on national insurance would help small businesses as well.
OK. Just lastly, sorry, no applause come there, yes. On the weekend, your colleague Kit Malthouse described HS2 as a killer whale that could rip the arm off the next Prime Minister due to costs. How nervous are you about HS2? Or is Kit
that sounds like a pitch. That sounds like a
sherry again?
That sounds like a pitch by Kit Malthouse for a job in a new government, doesn't it? That he would be the man who could, and he's a very effective minister, of course, in controlling costs. But I was not sure, frankly, of the case for HS2, but we are where we are. We signed the contracts, we spent the money, and now what we absolutely need to do is make sure we get value for money from it.
But
he's right. He's right that we need to keep an eagle eye on costs. And just on these transport projects in general, they take far too much time to do. Why do they take so long? And, we have got a majority over 70. I want to pass legislation to speed up these projects. We're no longer part of the EU. We should use those freedoms to do things differently and get things done faster.
How did the EU hold up HS2?
Well, I know, for example, that some of the procurement rules add extra time. There's lots of domestic problems as well. I don't deny that, Nick. But there's no reason why we shouldn't be one of the fastest countries in the world to get projects done, and we certainly aren't at the moment.
Okay, thank you. You don't need to get up. I'm getting up so that we can look after this side of the room. Gentleman in a check shirt. Sir, your name if you would.
Peter from Tadcaster. Good evening, Liz. I'd like to ask you a question in relation to energy supply. So this winter is going to be very, very challenging for the people of this country. Is it time that we re-looked at shale gas extraction?
So, I support fracking in areas where people want it to happen. And I do think it can be part of the solution, as well as releasing more of the North Sea gas reserves. But more of the North Sea gas reserves will be quicker. We also need to do more nuclear power. And in particular, so we are now producing small modular reactors in Derbyshire. We should be having more of those in the UK, but also exporting them around the world. So it's a business opportunity for us as well. But I agree with you, it's going to be a tough winter, and we need to make sure we're doing all we can to lower bills and increase supply.
So you're in favour of shale. How would you determine if local people supported it?
Well,
you should only proceed if local people. Am I right?
Absolutely. And
so how would we work out?
I also think that one of the ways that we gain local support is for people sharing the benefits of, for example, gas extraction.
But would you
or
poll
other
people? Would you send round asking them to vote? How would we know?
We've got these things called councils who can assess
indeed.
local
You were in a
opinion.
planning department, I think, once, yes.
Well, I was on a planning committee of the council,
so
which is not the best experience I've had in my life. But local authorities, local MPs, we gauge public opinion that way.
Okay, thank you for that. Again, don't need to move. Who we're with? Is it a young lady in a white jacket? Yes, please. I'll get out of your way.
Hello, Liz. Thank you for taking my question. It relates some way to schools and to our young people. During lockdown, when the schools were closed, many schools, without consultation with parents, took the opportunity to remove all the girls' toilets and make all of the toilets mixed toilets. Now, we have girls across this whole country who will not go to the toilet during break times. They go back to their lessons, they put their hands up to go to the toilets, and the teacher says you should have gone in break time. Now, I want the government, you brought in a policy recently that said all new government buildings would have separate toilets for men and women. I want you to bring in a policy that guarantees that our daughters can go to a toilet in a safe environment in any school in this country.
I completely agree with you. I have sought to clarify that as Women's Minister. I've been very clear that single-sex spaces should be protected, particularly for young people, as well as vulnerable people, vulnerable women in domestic violence shelters, for example. And I can assure you, as Prime Minister, I would direct that to happen, because our girls need, it's a difficult time being a teenager, being a young girl, and you should be able to have the privacy you need in your own loo. So I 100% agree with you, and I would make that happen.
Okay, and a lot of support. But what of a pupil who is transitioning? Where does he, she go to the toilet?
Well, first of all...
I asked, do we have boys, girls, and another?
First of all, I do not believe that under 18s should be able to make irreversible decisions about their own bodies that they might come to regret later. So I think it's very important to note that. And of course, schools should be sensitive. They can provide additional facilities, but it should not be at the expense of protecting young girls.
All right, thank you for that. We haven't done enough this... Sorry to spin you round. Sir, you didn't ask before, did you? No. I just need to double check. You're in a blue suit. A blue suit and a blue shirt, appropriately enough. Your question. Your name first, sir.
My name's Marcus.
Hello, Marcus.
I'm here from Nottingham tonight, but I was inspired...
Sorry about all the Yorkshire mentions.
That's
Apologies.
okay. That's okay.
Hope I haven't lost your vote.
You haven't. I'm here representing Nottingham because we haven't got a hustings in Nottingham, but I'm not bitter about that. The reason I'm here was because I was inspired by a lady who was on TV when I was 14. Of course, it was Margaret Thatcher. I grew up in a council estate, so I've been inspired by the Conservative beliefs. Now living in Nottingham, and when you look at inner cities and the issues that we have in inner cities, council estates, and especially councils who use money almost to bankruptcy, what policies are you going to bring in to deal with those type of councils?
Thanks, Marcus. Liz Truss.
Well, I too grew up in Leeds, and we've had a Labour council in Leeds since the dawn of time, and they were utterly hopeless. And too often in schools, and there were some good teachers in my schools, there were some not so good teachers, but too often the edicts that came from the city council were all about political correctness rather than about getting on with teaching English and maths and giving the kids the opportunities they need in life. So I completely agree with you. What we have to do is make sure that these Labour councils, these Labour mayors, are held to account and they're able to. So I agree with empowering local authorities more. They need to be raising the money they spend so that voters understand that when they're not delivering, they should be kicked out.
All right. I'm not familiar with Leeds, although my
I'm
current...
sorry to hear
well,
that,
my
Nick.
current partner is.
It's a gap. It's a gap in your education.
My current... And you'll, I'm sure, help me. My current partner is, and she danced regularly at Mr. Craig's, which was the nightclub. There we are. So that has to be local. So she was right. You've been disobliging about the school you went to in Leeds, haven't you? You've made it sound like it was some backwards, what does they say, gutter comprehensive that Alistair Campbell once called them. It's nothing like it. It's a lovely, it's a lovely part of town. Houses start at £1 million, and everybody wants to live there. Why were you so rude?
Look, I didn't say that my school was...
comprehensive.
I didn't. I think he said bog standard comprehensive.
We're there now.
But I'm not claiming it was a sink school. It was an average comprehensive at the time. And what I'm saying is that average comprehensive, under the auspices of Leeds City Council, there were too many kids who were able to leave school without the education that they needed. The teaching was patchy. We didn't have league tables at the time. We didn't have a national curriculum. So there were kids who fell through the cracks. And also,
it's not a rough
in
town,
Leeds,
though, is it?
well, it's a very mixed intake at Roundhay School, and it's a good, it's a good group of pupils. And what I found, by the way, is when I left that school and went to Oxford University, there were pretty talented people at Roundhay School who should have been at Oxford University rather than some of the people that were actually there. But what I felt was there were low expectations of some of the pupils in the school, and sometimes those low expectations were actually about where those kids had come from in Leeds.
Okay.
So there were different expectations from kids from the middle class areas than there were from the council estates, and I thought that was wrong.
Okay.
And I still think it's wrong. And what I don't want is kids growing up around this country who have the teachers or the schools or the council have low expectations from them because of their background.
Thank you, Liz Truss, and a lot of support for your view. Gentleman in a blue shirt directly ahead of me. Oh, sorry, I was told you had the microphone. Will you go second? You'll go second because it's a man in a white shirt, I think, sir. No? Yes?
Hello, I'm Graham from York.
Hello, Graham.
You talk a lot about growth. In fact, you both do, which is obviously good. I know a lot of small businesses in and around York who would dearly love to grow. The businesses out there, but they simply cannot get the staff. What would you do about that?
Well, you're right. After COVID, after furlough, it has been difficult getting staff across the country. One thing I would do is tighten up our incentives in our welfare system to encourage more people to go into work. We've still got a lot of economically inactive people who are not taking the opportunities of work, and it's about encouragement, it's about making sure those job opportunities are there. But we need to do that because otherwise the people who are working are bearing the burden of paying the cost. And of course, there are some people who can't work, but there's an awful lot of people who we can encourage to get into work. And I work very closely with Therese Coffey. I know she's looking at this issue, but that is what we need to do. We need to train up more people in the types of skills that we need, and we need to make sure the incentives are there to get people into work.
What impact, if any, has Brexit had on the labour market?
Well, these problems that the gentleman has just been talking about, they're global problems. They've got the same problems in the United States, in Canada and across the world, because we are all suffering from the global economic shock caused by COVID.
Would not some of the farmers you referenced earlier say they miss some European workers? You mentioned in your earlier speech, Liz Truss, are they not missing the Belgians
in Europe,
and
they are
Bulgarians?
also struggling to get workers on their farms as well. What we have is the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Scheme. I support that. I think we do need to make sure there are available people to work on our farms. I talked earlier about my passion for British food. I think it is important that we open up those schemes, on a temporary basis, on a seasonal basis, to bring those people into the country. But this is not a problem that's unique to Britain. It's a problem across Europe. It's a problem in Canada, America, and around the world.
All right, last 2-3 minutes. So, white polo shirt. Sir, your question to Liz Truss. I'll get out of your way, Mr. Truss.
Hi, so Alex, living in Leeds from Birmingham. Quick question about child benefit. So at the moment, it currently tapers off when one earner in the house earns above 50k. There's quite a big range of combinations of earners within a household, especially with people that earn 50k that do or don't have student loans as well, which makes up quite a big difference. And especially when one of the earners goes on maternity leave and can have quite a big impact on the household income. Is that something that you'll look into if you were leader?
As I mentioned earlier, I want to review the tax system to make sure it's fair for families. Because at the moment, if you take time off work to look after a child or to look after an elderly relative, you are relatively penalised in the tax system. So I want to look at that, and we need to make sure the tax system works with things like child benefit, so it's fair. But overall, I think we just need to simplify the system because it's so complicated for people to understand. It's so complicated for the government to administer, and sometimes the government loves complexity. I talked about the Treasury earlier, but they love these complex schemes, these combinations of benefits, and often it's just very, very hard for people to work out exactly how it will affect them. And I want to reward people who do the right thing, who look after their families, who go out to work, who start a business, and we need our tax system to reflect that.
All right, if we sprint, we can get through two more. Sorry to pause to get there. Yes, indeed. Blue shirt, sir.
Hi, Liz. It's Adrian from Bury Conservatives.
Right.
A member of Bury Conservatives. And the first question to you is...
Well, you only have one, sir. I'm sorry, so if you could get your... we've got a minute and a half.
Would you have Jeremy Hunt? Would you have Jeremy Hunt in your cabinet?
Would you have Jeremy Hunt? I think certainly wouldn't have Jeremy Corbyn. That'd be a hell of a story.
And do you think...
Might lock him in the wardrobe, but not in the cabinet. I've got to limit that to you. I'm so sorry, sir. Jeremy Hunt, final question.
I am not thinking at this stage about cabinet jobs, but what I can reassure you is I will make sure all of the talent of the Conservative Party, whichever part of the Conservative Party they're from, are on the front bench. And it will be on the basis of can they deliver? Are they going to be the people to get the waiting list down in the NHS? Are they going to be the people who are going to stand up to Russia? Are they the people who's going to shake up the Treasury and deliver the investment we need across our country and cut taxes? That is what I will base my decision on about who is in the cabinet.
And the final question, we're going to swing round to here. I think it's a young man. Sir, would you stand up and give us your first name, sir?
I'm Patrick.
Hello, Patrick.
Hello. We've spoken a lot about tonight about working people subsidising those who don't work. Well, in this country, we have a massive amount of people who don't work. Pensioners who have their triple lock subsidised by people who do work. And when increasingly young people can't afford to buy a house, rent's going incredibly high, and national insurance hiked, so it's becoming increasingly hard to work. But people who own their houses, paid off their mortgages, and have a lot of money in wealth and equity, aren't paying, whilst working people and young people pay for them to sit at home and watch daytime TV.
Well, not a universally popular view, Liz Truss.
Well, first of all, can I say, this is one of the many reasons that we need to reverse the national insurance increase, because we shouldn't be penalising families and working people. And, older people have a huge contribution to make to our society. What I think is that we should be helping older people work if they want to work. And I think we could do things like more part-time jobs. So in other countries, people tend to gradually wind down into retirement. In Britain, there's sort of is a cut-off. And I think people who are older in the population have a great deal to contribute. So what I would like to do is see what financial encouragement we can give to get more people working part-time and to help in the economy. And just on the subject of houses...
What would they do?
Can I just say...
Have I got to go and work at B&Q now when I'm 70?
How old are you now?
I'm in my early 60s, Miss Truss.
Well, you've got another... take Nick Ferrari, he's got another 30 years on the clock. Don't you think? Don't you think?
I think not, but how would you financially incentivise them to go and work at home base?
There are things we can do. I'm not talking about working at home base. I think people have huge... By the way, I don't denigrate working at home base either, but there are lots of roles that people can take up, and what I think is people have a huge contribution to make to our society. People are living longer. And one of the great things that we did under the David Cameron government is remove compulsory retirement, so people are able to choose, and I think that's really important. But on house building, the problem is we've had these top-down targets, which are decided in Whitehall. What I want to see is much more bottom-up, locally driven housing to make sure we do have the houses so that young people can get on the housing ladder.
And are too many people sitting on their backsides watching Love Island, as the colleague suggested there? Yes or no?
No is the answer.
All right.
And I think people work incredibly hard, and the people in this room are people who have given up their Thursday night to listen to you and me, Nick and Rishi, and Rishi. And work incredibly hard for the Conservative Party. And we have a great voluntary party. We have fantastic people that work for charities. Okay. But what we need to do is encourage that and get off people's backs so they can spend more time doing things that contribute.
Let me get off my backside and ask you all to a round of appreciation for Liz Truss, if you would.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Liz. Thank you very much.
Nick.
See you again.
See you.
Thank you very much indeed. Liz.
I hope you've got another 30 years on the clock.
Of course I have. If you demand it, it will happen.
Liz Truss and Nick Ferrari wrapping up that debate, the first of 12 this summer in Leeds. You heard a lot from both candidates, lots for us to get into. You don't get a vote in this contest, but here on LBC you certainly get a say, and now is the time for you to have yours. 0345 6060 973, the number to call. Let me know what you made of Rishi Sunak. Let me know what you made of Liz Truss. Which of the two candidates impressed you most? Did anyone exceed or perhaps fail to meet your expectations? And can you see yourself voting for either of them? But I also want to know what you made of the topics, the issues that they were talking about. Were they the things that mattered to you? We had school toilets, we had greyhound racing, we had Love Island. We didn't hear a great deal from the audience of the NHS. We didn't hear much about the cost of living. We didn't hear about childcare or crime or climate change. Were the two candidates talking to the issues that you want the next Prime Minister to focus on? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Before we get to your calls, texts and tweets, let's bring in Ian Dale, LBC presenter. In a moment, we'll hear from somebody who until a couple of weeks ago was working at the heart of government to hear what he thought of the debate. But first, Ian, your verdict.